My journey as a Superman fan started with a tattered red cape blowing in the wind. That ending rocketed me forward like a red-blue blur through a decade-long origin story and poignant tales of self-discovery and fatherhood, and backwards to the character's very beginnings. Now, on this podcast, we journey together across time and media to examine the stories that have defined the Man of Steel for over 80 years. Welcome to the 50th episode of Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. This is the Donnerverse Part 1. Joining me to discuss 1978's Superman the Movie, directed by Richard Donner, is returning guest, our most frequent guest, comic book artist V Ken Marion. Welcome back, buddy.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me back. Yeah, I feel like I'm an unofficial regular on the show a little bit, which is pretty cool. Thanks for having me for so many times.
For sure. One of the things that I'm most proud of about the show is our stable of guests, of which you are a part. And as people have likely noticed, we go back to a lot of the same voices for these episodes. And, you know, there are some who kind of pop in and out, but we have sort of our stable of guests, and you're a big part of that. And you were here for the series premiere. You've been here for a bunch along the way. You're here for number 50. I anticipate having you here for number 100. And when eventually this all comes to an end, and hopefully that won't be for a very long time, but when we get to that inevitable series finale, I hope to have you back for that too.
Oh, dude, I would love to, man. Thanks for having me back for so many times. Like, this has been so much fun hanging out with you digitally and virtually and, talking about Superman. So it's been great. It's been so much fun.
Yes. Well, I appreciate your time as always. And as you said, virtually, we've been doing these all remotely, but I think we are getting to the point where we'll be doing these in person. And then that'll be a whole other angle to this, where we're both in Flat Squirrel Studios recording these episodes. It'll be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. That'll be awesome because we live really close to each other. So, yeah, your office back there, I see it in the corner. I'm always like, oh, I can't wait to record one in person. All that great setup and the mics and everything. Should be fun.
We'll get there. We'll get there sooner rather than later, I would say, at this point. So I know everyone is excited for Superman the Movie talk. We're going to dive into that. But as this is our 50th episode, I did just want to take a moment to thank you and all of the other guests who have brought such enthusiasm and insight to all of these discussions. This simply would not work if I didn't have you guys to bounce off of. So I appreciate all of the guests so much. And of course, my thanks to the audience, people who have listened and watched and commented and shared, people who have joined the Patreon. Really, really, truly, this experience has exceeded any expectation that I had for it in terms of what it's allowed me to explore with respect to my fandom and this community of other Superman fans and other Superman podcasters out there. To become a part of all of this really, like I said, has exceeded any expectation that I had. So I really do appreciate all of that. I know 50 episodes that's not the biggest milestone, but it's not nothing either. So I thought it was worth taking this moment to address it at this point.
No, hell yeah, man. And like not for just, being a guest, but also a listener. Like, I listen to every one of your episodes. So every Wednesday when they come out, it's something I look forward to. So I'm sure there's a lot of other listeners who feel the same way. So thank you for, being 50 in and still want to keep doing more, So thanks.
Right on. Well, my pleasure. And going back to what I said a second ago, really, I know there are people out there who, listen, and I've never heard from them, and that's perfectly fine, right? Nobody owes me a message or anything like that. But man, I really do appreciate the people who have reached out, and not even that I'm looking for compliments, but people who have reached out and have shared their take on the things that we've talked about. And that's been really cool. And sometimes they are able to share something that I wasn't aware of, or other times it's just, I agree with the take that you guys had, or other times it's, I completely disagree with the way you guys saw it, and here's why, but it's always respectful and fun, and that's really been cool. So, again, thank you to everyone who has. And, if anyone is out there listening and you've been silent thus far, that's perfectly fine. But if you ever do want to reach out, Digging for Kryptonite's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We also have our Flat Squirrel Podcast Network Facebook group, if you'd like to join that. So those are some great ways to sort of become part of the conversation if you want.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to do that.
And on
that, hearing back.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note, so I did put out a call on Twitter not too long ago. I said we're going to be doing our 50th episode. If anyone has any questions about the show, feel free to reach out. And only one person took me up on this, but that's quite all right. They were two good questions from the delightful Rick Reason on Twitter. So shout out to Rick. And these are questions that maybe others have had as well, if it's crossed anyone's mind. So the questions that Rick had were, what has my favorite episode been, and what episode has surprised me the most? Which I thought were the second one in particular. I did give some thought to. So I guess before I give my answer, you've been on so many now, Ken. Is there an episode that you've done that you would be like, oh, that was really my favorite to do?
Okay, so yeah, I didn't think about this.
I know I am 100% putting you on the spot, and I apologize.
This is the first I'm hearing about this. So, well, off the top of my head, I mean, I really liked our Steel episode. That was a fun one to record, and it was, I feel like, a character that nobody really talks about. So it was fun to like shed some light onto that character in that movie, and hopefully let people know how cool Steel is. But I mean, just for like entertainment wise, like listening back, like, I mean, I really liked our Snyder Cut one, but one of the funnier ones I think we did was the Superman 2 one, which we're kind of this is like the sequel to of that one here tonight. But yeah, that was a listening back, that was the one I think that was the funniest to listen to. Like, I feel we had some good jokes in there,
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. No, that's really funny. I'll say this, it's very hard to pick a favorite, and I don't know if this sounds like, oh, of course he's going to say this, but I genuinely enjoy all of the episodes. And the thing is, if I recorded one and I didn't enjoy it and I didn't think it was a good episode, I wouldn't release it. So, all the ones that I put out, I'm proud of, and I enjoyed. But I will give an answer. I think that one that definitely stands out to me was the Death of Superman episode that I did. And and the audience knows how much the Death of Superman means to me. And so I guess going into it, I don't want to say I was nervous, but it was one of those things where I was like, is the reread going to live up to my memory and my expectation? And then are we going to have the conversation that I'm hoping to have? Am I going to articulate everything that I want to about this story that means so much to me? Like, there was just kind of a lot riding on it for me, I guess. And I just had such a good time doing, like, I'm so proud of that episode. And I mean, I can say this about, virtually all of them, where I said everything that I wanted to say, but for that in particular, like, I recorded everything that I really wanted to say about the story that got me into comics and into Superman. And so that one definitely stands out. And then, not just saying this because you're here, but the first Snyder episode that you and I did, this was like the 4th or 5th episode of the whole show.
Was it the Batman versus Superman one?
Yeah, Man of Steel. We did Man of Steel and BVS. And I was very early on in the run. It was the first video podcast that we did. It was the first episode that I did using that particular video conferencing platform.
That's when I was using my phone, and like I got a phone call in the middle of it, and like it like cut out.
Yeah, we lost you a couple of times. Yeah. It was very ironic because we were talking about the tornado scene in Man of Steel, and we were like literally getting tornado warnings in this area. There was a lot of stuff going on. We powered through it, and I didn't edit it. So like all of it's in the episode. People heard it as we lost you and got you back. But it was one of those things. It was just like that learning curve of, navigating the remote setup and the video setup. But also, we went 2 hours on Snyder, and it was one of those ones where we weren't just sort of, we were making a case for something. And I think that was the first episode where I did something like that. And that's been really cool as we've moved forward with the show, is, shining a light on something like Superman Lives, like we did recently, that maybe not as many people know about, but also, again, defending something, offering an alternative point of view, like I said, making a case for the works of Zack Snyder. So that was one of those episodes where it just gave me a sense of like, oh, this is where we can go. These are the kinds of things we can do. This is what the show can be. So in that sense, it was an important one, and I hold that one up as well. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, for surprising, for me, your set on the animated series that you just did with Jeremy.
Yeah.
Because I loved that show when I was a kid, and like I've never really went back to watch it that much, or really even think about that much. And when those episodes started coming out, it got me very nostalgic. And those were, I wasn't expecting to like enjoy hearing someone talk about them as much as I did. So that was a really fun set of episodes. Yeah, I think you did 5 of them, right?
Yeah.
You did 4 or 5 of them. Yeah.
Yeah. No, right.
And Jeremy he's a great guest too. So it was like really great conversation that you guys had.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed that, and I know he'll appreciate that as well. For surprising, I guess, like, I don't know that any of the recordings themselves have necessarily surprised me so much, but in terms of the prep and just the overall process, I mean, there are a lot of directions I could take this in, but one thing that I will single out is the George Reeves Adventures of Superman show. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed those. Like, it wasn't just, hey, I'm watching this, you know, from an academic perspective to talk about it on the podcast. Like, I really got into them and I wasn't expecting that. So that was maybe one of the most surprising pieces where I really was just blown away by how much I enjoyed them, genuinely.
Yeah, they're cool. They're very cool. And if no one's ever watched them, just heard about them, they should definitely check them out because they're definitely a cool time capsule for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Ken and audience, for indulging me for 10 minutes as we celebrated our 50th episode here. Now, the Donnerverse event begins. 5 episodes looking at both the direct works as well as the influence of the late filmmaker Richard Donner in both movies and comics. And we are going to be talking about this again over the course of 5 episodes, beginning, of course, naturally in this episode with 1978's Superman the movie. Now, I know this is a movie people probably don't know a lot about, so we should probably spend a good amount of time giving a very detailed plot summary of the film. What do you think?
You're joking, right?
Yeah, I'm joking. This is one of those times where I'm going to assume...
Your audience, he looked for a second, Anthony looked dead serious on the video. Like, I thought for a second, I thought he was being serious. So,
yeah, this is one instance we always, as a host, I feel like it's always important to set the table and give context for what we're talking about. This is one instance where I'm going to assume that anyone listening to this has seen Superman the movie. And that, in part, is one of the reasons why we built a whole event around the work of Richard Donner, this movie, and what this movie gave rise to. So yes, we will assume that people are familiar with the movie. And I'm gonna say this right at the top. I've long had a little bit of baggage when it comes to Superman the movie. But prior to my rewatch for this episode, I sort of realized something, and it really shifted the way I look at Donner's vision of the character. And by the time we're done with this episode, man, I am unpacking all that baggage. I am leaving it behind, and I am moving forward with just love and appreciation for this vision of the character for what it is. And
okay, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Because if your listeners, if anyone's a longtime listener, or if you went back to listen to the earlier episodes, the very first episode we talked about this is my, like, definitive idea of Superman, like not the movie, but Christopher Reeve as Superman. So, like, this movie is a very big place in my heart and in my childhood, and like we'll get into it, but it's in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. So it's like, this is a, like, untouchable movie to me in a lot of respects. So and I know that you have a more complicated history with it, so I thought this episode might be a little bit of, like, good cop, bad cop between the two of us, but, like, I'm super excited to get into this.
Yeah, and let me just say, I've despite any mixed feelings, I've always had a lot of love for it, but at the same time, it hasn't occupied the same space in my fandom as it has for you, and which I think is interesting. And kind of on that note, I want to kick it to you first. I know we talked about this when you were on the first episode of the show. We talked about our Superman fan journeys at that point. They've obviously expanded since then, reading and watching, talking about all this stuff. But for anyone who, you know, didn't listen to that premiere episode or needs a refresher, do you mind just sharing when and how and with whom you first experienced Superman the movie?
Yeah, totally. So I actually just recently sent you pictures of this when I was visiting my parents' house a month ago over Christmas. But my first experience was a VHS tape. And do you remember those pictures I sent you of the VHS box? So my dad had bought the VHS of Superman when it came out, like, for the first time, like, the 80s, like, before I was born, you know, when he told me it was $100 back in, like, 1980, whenever he bought it. And, like, the box is so crazy, like, because I snapped a picture to show Anthony, like, the cover of the box is, like, a still from the movie of Superman flying. Like, it's not, like, a poster or anything. It's, like, literally, like, a shot from the movie that they put on the cover. And the back is, like, watch the cinematic masterpiece as Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman. Like they write like a whole like there's like a paragraph on the back just like explaining it. So that was funny. But yeah, that VHS was, I think, my first exposure to superheroes in general was that. Like, I mean, I don't even remember the first time I watched it because it just felt like it was always part of my life. Like I had the Superman PJs, I'd run around in my backyard pretending I was Superman. So yeah, that movie was just like, I'd watch it with my parents all the time when I was a kid. And, you know, there were no other superhero movies it was that and the Adam West Batman movie were the ones that I watched when I was a kid. So yeah, it was like all the time. So in growing up, I, you know, would watch it every couple of years, and it just, you know, became so ingrained into like my life. You know, it's one of those movies that, like I said, top 5 movies for me, like Desert Island movies. Like if I could only have 5, or like the 5 that like I hold on to from my youth, you know, that's definitely one of them.
And I love that you still have that VHS. That's a wonderful thing. Have you had the opportunity to see it on the big screen at any point?
No, I have not.
So
you did, right?
I did. Alamo showed it in 2018 for the anniversary, and I did get to see it, and it was a really cool experience. So the next time an anniversary rolls around, definitely keep an eye, because I think for you in particular, I think you would get a lot out of, as much as you've seen it so many times, but to see it on the big screen with an audience, there was something to that, even though I had to shush the lady next to me while we were watching. And this is Alamo. I mean, they're known for their no talking, no texting policy, but you know, it's funny. Part of me felt a little bad because this lady she was really enjoying herself, but she was like repeating every line to her husband or whoever she was with. And at a certain point I was like, you gotta stop talking. It's like, I've waited my whole life to see this on a big screen. I don't need this.
That's funny.
But no, that's so cool. I guess that's what's kind of funny, because, you know, you and I are, you know, just about the same age, and I too watched it with my dad when I was, I don't know. See, I don't remember vividly, specifically the exact instance, but I do have this vague memory of us watching it, and I want to say, you know, age 6 or 7, like somewhere around there. It was after my whole Death of Superman experience that I do remember more specifically, unless I've totally jumbled it, but I don't believe that's the case. And so it's one of those things where, it's not that you can only have one definitive moment, but I think for me, it was my dad reading me that Death of Superman comic. Like, that's the memory that is more deeply ingrained, and that was more formative for me in terms of my Superman fandom. Like, that's the one that I always go back to, even though, again, I think it was not very long after that at all that he and I watched it. And I don't think we owned it. It was probably on TV or something. Like, I don't recall owning a VHS. Maybe we did, but I don't think so. But we definitely watched it, and it was definitely a positive, you know, view that I had of it. It's not like I watched it and I was like, oh, this is terrible. Like, I definitely enjoyed it, but it just didn't cement for me the way that I think it did for you. But I've always watched it. I've always owned it in various forms on DVD. Now on Blu-ray, I have the motion picture anthology from 78 to 2006, that set that they put out with all of the Donner movies and Superman Returns. And like I said, I saw it on the big screen. So again, I don't want to paint this picture of like, oh, like I've always been dismissive of it, or it hasn't meant anything to me. It has, but it just never rose to that level for me for whatever reason. And, you know, as you know, you and I got older, right? And then we had Smallville. And so that was sort of that other big tent pole in my fandom. And for whatever reason, Superman the movie was just always there, but it didn't, like I said, rise to that same level, occupy that same space for me.
It's probably because you didn't own it. It's probably because I'm telling you, like, I watched it, like, there was a point when I was watching it like at least once a week, or like, you know what I mean? Like when because you know, when you're a kid, like, you know, oh, you know, it's raining out, put on Superman kind of thing, you know? So it was one of those things I just watched all the time. And it's funny, I was talking to my dad earlier this week about, because I was rewatching it, prepping for this episode, and he started telling me about when he was younger, like before I was born, when he was going to the movies and with my mom, and they were going to see some movie, and the trailer came for Superman, and he said that the first trailer was just that Christopher Reeve, you know, that shot like after he gets after his like montage with Jor-El, and you see him from like a distance, the tiny little in the distance and you see him in the suit and he flies toward the camera. He said that was like the whole trailer. And my dad said like he had no idea they were even making a Superman movie. And like that was like mind blowing. Like he was like, oh my God, I cannot wait to see. And it was like, I think a year and a half away. It was like a teaser that they like put out. So it was definitely like, it was interesting to hear that from him, from his perspective of like, this is going to be crazy to see this, you know? Cause like think about seeing like this movie in the 70s, like it had to be mind blowing, you know?
I'm sure. Was he a comic book fan?
So he liked the George Reeve show when he was a kid, but and when he was a little kid, he had some of the comics, but like that was pretty much it. Like he didn't read comics as he got older.
Gotcha.
But he like loved the George Reeve show.
So like a couple of things that are actually really interesting that I've been thinking about that you mentioned. So one is, you know, the fact that I didn't own it, and maybe that played a role in my not getting as into it because I wasn't watching it over and over. Dan Greenfield is going to be on another episode in this event, and he's the editor-in-chief of 13th Dimension. He's been on the show before, and we're going to be talking about the Superman 78 comic that recently came out. And I know because he and I have spoken about this, and he wrote a whole article about it on 13th Dimension that, you know, he's always been a big Batman fan. So when Superman came out and he was old enough to go see it at the time when it originally came out, he wasn't particularly excited about it, but he was visiting a relative and they went to see it and he loved it. And then when it hit HBO, he watched it over and over and over to the point where he basically memorized it. And for him, again, Batman is still number one for him, but that version of Superman is the one that he still holds on to this day. So I think there's definitely something to be said for the repetition, especially at the right age.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, and at the time, you know, I mean, really until 2008, let's be honest, like there weren't that many superhero movies that you had options for, you know what I mean? Like, okay, let's say up until when the first X-Men movie came out. So from like 70 to like 2000, you had that and you had a couple of Batman movies and that was it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And to your other point, I was thinking about this too. You and I are comic book fans, you're a comic book creator. So comics always loom large for us. But the thing that I always do remind myself of is that for most people, these adaptations are what they know when they think of these characters. And, you know, for our parents in particular, because I think it was the same for mine as well. My parents they weren't comic book readers, but they watched the George Reeve show and they watched the Superman movies in theaters. And so that's kind of what they had. So yeah, it's interesting. And again, not to minimize the comics because it all starts from there, but it's like you can't overstate the importance of these adaptations and shaping the way these characters are perceived by the majority of people. You know?
Yeah. True.
And then the other thing that you said that I totally agree with, I think about this a lot, especially with Star Wars. I'm not a big Star Wars guy. I never have been. I watched the re-release of the original trilogy in the 90s. I enjoyed them, but it wasn't...
Did you have the toys? Were you into the toys in the 90s?
Not really.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I had all the toys.
So maybe that's why. But at the same time, so like it just never meant as much to me as it did for so many others. But I always think with Star Wars in particular, I always think about, man, if you went to see those movies, especially the first one, when it first came out, when there was nothing else like it, and you were the right age, it's like, of course, this would grab you and capture your imagination. So yeah, for people who, you know, maybe knew Superman from the George Reeve show, or maybe didn't even have that much of a connection at all, and then you see that trailer and you see the movie, I mean, I can imagine what that would be like. Is there anything in your experience that's even close to that?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were talking before we started recording about Batman. We're recording this right after the Batman came out, which we'll save that for another topic because we've got an episode coming up on that. But I think like the most excited I had ever been coming out of a movie, like I think the closest thing that I could just think about that was close to what you're saying is the first Batman Begins. I kind of felt something like that, where it was like, I remember leaving that theater thinking like, I've never seen anything like this before, where it was like, this is taking a character that I've grown up with, that like I've always liked, that was like a superhero that's like fantastical, but made it like feel so real and possible that like it could actually happen in real life. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't know, maybe that might be the closest thing, because like Star Wars, like I had on VHS as a kid, and when the sequels came out, that's, it's kind of more of the same. It's not like breaking new ground, I don't know. What about you? Do you have anything?
It was funny when I was thinking of Batman Begins as well. I think you and I probably had similar experiences where I too came out of that and I was like, oh, like that's like a Batman movie could be.
Like it's real. Yeah. Like just like their Gotham City, like it felt like, because I remember coming home from the theater because I saw it with friends, like at that point, like I was old enough to like not go with my parents at that point, and I remember coming home and my mom was like, how was the movie? I'm like, it was crazy. It was like they explained everything, like why he has ears on his cowl and why there's like spikes on his gloves and like why he wears a cape. Like it was just like, it was mind blowing to me to like deconstruct it to a level of reality, to like that precise, that I then like quickly imagined like, oh, you could do this to all the characters and make them all like real like this, which they've done. Now we live in a world where they're all like that, they're all treated with reverence.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the closest experience that I've had to what your dad went through watching the trailer for the first time was seeing the trailer for the first Spider-Man movie in the early 2000s. Because, this was a point in time where the internet existed, but not to the extent that it did now. It's like now even if you're not seeking stuff out, it's like you can't scroll through Twitter without seeing images and trailers and all sorts of stuff and rumors and everything. So it was early enough where, I'm sure I knew that they were making one. I don't think I was like, oh my God, there's going to be a Spider-Man movie. Like I think I knew it was coming, and if you remember, that first trailer came out it was like a year early. It was very early. This was the infamous Twin Towers trailer.
I don't think I ever saw that trailer.
It is on. It's
like,
on.
I've heard about it. Like, I mean, I've seen it, but I'm saying like, I don't think I ever saw it before like 2010 or something, like on the internet. You know what I mean? Like, like the experience you're talking about. Did you see it online or in front of a movie? I saw it at a movie theater. I can't remember what movie it was, but it was at Movieland on Central Avenue in Yonkers, which is now the Alamo Drafthouse. So whatever I was seeing there at that time. And like I said, I think I knew there was a movie coming, but I didn't know anything about it. And I certainly wasn't anticipating a trailer. And the way that trailer unfolded, you don't know initially. It's a bank robbery at the beginning, and you don't realize it's a Spider-Man trailer until pretty far into it. And I just remember having that moment of like, just that excitement and the surprise. Yeah.
So I, again, like a long-winded way of saying, I can appreciate what your dad experienced with that.
I actually do. It's not to derail this from Superman. Just give me one more minute here. The similar thing was the first Transformers movie. I was seeing Pirates of the Caribbean with a bunch of my friends. I think it was the second one. Yeah. Cause I was working at the movie theater at this point, and I remember going into this movie and we were like sitting there watching, and this trailer starts where like it's like the first teaser trailer for Transformers, like you said, like you wouldn't know it was a Transformers movie. It was like a rocket taking off and like landing on Mars, and this like Mars rover goes around on the planet, and everyone was like what is this? Everyone was like watching, like, because it looked like Apollo 13 or something, right? And then like the camera, you see this shadowy thing and it goes shrink, 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 and like smashes it, and then like the Transformers logo comes up and starts shifting. And I remember, because I had no idea they were making a live action Transformers. And like, I remember me and my friends were all like, holy shit, there's going to be a live action Transformers movie. And like, that trailer made it look amazing. And the first one's okay, but like, the first movie's pretty good. But like, it was just that level of like, this is something that like I never thought was even possible. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So.
No, for sure. And so, bringing it back to Superman the movie and Donner in particular, one of the things that, regardless of any issues that I've had with the movie, or more particularly its legacy, because I think that's where I've had the larger problem.
That's fair enough. That's definitely fair enough.
Regardless of all of that, I've always appreciated, always admired, and been very grateful for the fact that Richard Donner and company, including, of course, Christopher Reeve, but that starting with Donner, really treated this with such reverence and respect and integrity, and told an epic tale of the Man of Steel that still holds up for the most part today, visually and narratively. And the fact that, my issues with the legacy aside, the fact that for so many people, we're decades removed from it, and for so many people, that's still the definitive take on Superman, speaks volumes about what he was able to achieve. So I've always had a lot of respect and reverence for, again, just for him treating it so seriously when most people certainly didn't expect that, and he probably could have gotten away with not doing that, right? But they really went into this, I think, with truly good intentions, and it shows.
100%. I echo everything you just said. And the part about you saying it still holds up, when people, like when I talk to my friends about ranking your favorite comic book movies, and inevitably people are always either like one of the Avengers movies or Dark Knight as their favorite, right? But for me, my number one will always be this movie. Like this is my favorite superhero movie. And part of that's nostalgia, but the other part is like rewatching it again. Like this movie does hold up. Like it like by modern standards, the only thing that's really kind of wonky about it are some of the flying scenes because of the green screen. But this movie holds up like by today's standards. Like the acting, everything about it is so well done that that's kind of one of the reasons I feel like I like the Snyderverse so much, is because if you want that classic Bronze Age era Superman, this movie exists, and this is kind of a perfect movie, and you're not going to do better than it for this version of the character. So like, why, if you're going to do a Superman movie, you got to do something different, because this is like a perfect vision of this era of the character, you know?
So that points to one of those areas that I've had an issue with, and it's not the movie's fault at all, other than being a very strong movie. And I don't know if fault isn't even the right word, but I mean, ultimately this goes back to, subsequent creators and the fans and we've talked about this. Most recently, we did our Superman Lives episode, and we talked about the Nick Cage movie that never happened, and how, you can't help but feel that was due in no small part to maybe the studio perceiving there to be resistance to this different take on the character, right? Because people were so attached to what had come before. And again, that's where I think I have a bit of an issue. And yes, we see that play out most recently and specifically with the Snyderverse, where I feel like people are so attached to the Christopher Reeve version. But like I think you and I are on the same page with this. It's like, you can always go back to watching that, but it doesn't mean that you need to retell it in subsequent iterations. No,
but it's like a fool's game to try to do it, because this movie is so damn good that you're not going to. Like you're not gonna do a better version of this movie. This movie is like a perfect movie, Like it's like, aside from some of the dated special effects, it's like you said, narratively, structurally, the acting, the portrayals of the characters are so dead on. Like it's a great movie. It's like a masterpiece, It's like, can you imagine if someone like every 10 years tried to remake The Godfather? Like, you know what I mean? By like making like the same movie, like it'd be like crazy,
Well, and we're going to talk about this in the final episode of this Donnerverse event, but Superman Returns is very specifically an attempt to try to replicate this. And I feel like, and we'll talk about this more in that episode, but I feel like there's been a little bit of a resurgence in people now voicing their support of that movie, and the Brandon Routh portrayal in particular. Yeah, I mean, I see, especially after he came back for Crisis on television.
He's not the problem with that movie.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But I guess just this idea of, this was a very specific example of the filmmakers trying to just redo what had been done before, and it didn't work. And, maybe you can point to more specific, there wasn't enough action or this and that, but at the end of the day, it's like, this was as close to, the Donner version of the character as you could get, and it didn't work. So, it's funny because I know I've used him as an example before when we were talking the Snyder stuff, but my buddy Zach, not Zach from the Smallville podcast, different Zach, who is no fan of the Snyderverse, has no love for it, and takes any opportunity he can on Facebook to remind me of that. To what end, I'm not sure, but he wants me to know that he doesn't like these movies, and that's fine. It's all good, knock yourself out, like or don't like, whatever, it's fine. But as I know right? Not too long ago, we saw photos of Henry Cavill in the Christopher Reeve suit, right? For like one of the screen tests or whatever.
Oh, I never saw that.
Oh, I'll send it to you. You got to take a look at it. It's very cool to see. So the photos are out there. And so Zach, I think
how does he look? How does he look in the Christopher Reeve suit?
I thought he looked good.
Okay. Okay, because okay.
But anyway, the point is, Zach, I think someone had posted it on my page or something, and Zach commented, and he was like, "That's the costume he should have worn in Man of Steel." I was saying to myself, really? You think that's the costume he should have worn in that movie? Like, the sensibilities of those films are so, like, they're telling very different stories. These are different interpretations, different versions. So again, and that's a microcosm, but just an example of, again, I think people holding on to this at the expense of maybe being open to other interpretations. And so I don't say that to put down the Donner version in any way, shape, or form. It's like the opposite. I kind of agree with you. It's like we had that version done to the peak of its possibility. And
exactly. That's where I come from it too. Is like, it's like, I feel like it's almost like disrespectful to like just try to like remake it as worse. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, like being reverential for like what it is. You know what I mean? Like, it's
that, you know what, that's actually a really interesting question. And obviously, you know, I don't know enough about Donner or Christopher Reeve to really be able to answer this, but I don't know. Do you think they would only want subsequent Superman movies to try to replicate what they did? I have
no idea. Probably not.
I would think that's the thing, man. Like, I would think not. And I wanted to mention this because it's really interesting. I watched, in addition to the movie itself, right? I watched like all of the special features that are on that motion picture anthology Blu-ray. And there was so much behind the scenes material that I had never really seen. And I want to circle back to that, but there were interviews, of course. And, you know, Christopher Reeve talked about how he saw himself as a custodian of this character for a set period of time. And again, I'm extrapolating a bit from that. And I don't know if this was necessarily what he meant, but you know, I don't know that he would necessarily want every subsequent iteration to try to match what he did. I never got that sense. And so you do kind of wonder, it's like, who are we doing this for?
Yeah. I mean, nostalgia, I think, really is what it comes down to, you know? I mean, Batman seems to have been a little more adaptable with that over the years. I feel like that people have been able to acknowledge their fandom of the past, but want to like reinterpret. And for some reason, Superman seems to be like, honestly, I think it's because this Superman movie was so well done that it's like I feel like a lot of people like realized like I don't know, like because I'm think to like, you know, like the 90s Batman movies, specifically the Burton era, and like I mean I love those movies, you know, specifically the first three. Like I like Batman Forever, but like there's definitely room for improvement. You know what I mean? Even with the best of nostalgia, I think like an objective person can look at those and say, these are cool, but there's like a different take we could do here. But I think with this Superman movie, it's so like it just feels so real. Like it's that thing we were talking about, Batman Begins. Like this movie kind of like has that reality kind of baked into it already. You know, they're not really like playing big and playing for like the sequels do that, right? Like Superman 2 and 3 and 4 like definitely delve into that like cornball like territory, but this first movie I think just is so anchored in like reality, but while also staying true to who like the absolute core of the comic book character of the time, that like he looks exactly like Christopher Reeve looks exactly like the comic book, like stepped off into the screen, you know?
I agree with that. And I feel like, yeah, when you look at this, they told the story in really a mythic way, right? They captured the myth of this character, but they did so in a way that kind of married the real world, like the realism of the world with the world of the comic books. And maybe that's the secret, you know, the secret recipe there that made it pop and work so well. It's funny / sad that, again, people hold up this version of the character, and I understand why. And I guess it really does go back to that movie. I know there's a lot of love for Superman 2. You know, we talked a lot about Superman 2 previously, but I think people might be a little split on Superman 2, but I think most tend to agree the latter half of the series, and those were not Donner movies, but you know, the latter half of the series was a disappointment, right? Yeah. To put it mildly. And so it's just kind of interesting that even within the entire Reeve series, we have diminishing returns here. But in any event, we're here specifically talking about about the first one. And going back to those special features, like I said, a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And one thing that I came into this, and I watched the special features first before the rewatch. And one thing that I appreciated way more this time was everything that went into the effects. I know you mentioned earlier that might be one of the areas where it doesn't hold up quite as well, but you know what? It was so fascinating to see how they did so much of this stuff. Like they used, and again, I might be saying stuff that people are well familiar with, including yourself, but using the miniatures for the exteriors on Krypton and for a lot of the California earthquake damage, everything they did with the harnesses and projectors for the flying sequences, the special reflective material that they used to create the Kryptonian garb that would make it look like they were glowing. Just this overall, that
was cool as hell. What the Krypton looks like, yeah, it
was so cool. And just this over, and just seeing the construction of these massive sets that they built in London, and again, we're so used to all these CGI heavy movies, and I'm not knocking that. I know there's a lot of work and a lot of artistry that goes into creating that. That's not nothing. I don't mean to put that down, but what they were able to achieve in the 70s with practical effects is astounding. Yeah. And yes, does it, stand shoulder to shoulder visually with what we see now? No, it's different, but it, in its own way, it really holds up.
Parts of it, I mean, when I say some of the flying effects, I don't mean like all of the flying effects. I mean like certain shots. Gotcha. Like the scene when he saves the helicopter, I think that still holds up. And like when he stops the missiles and stuff, I think most of it holds up. Like it's mainly like there's this one scene like when he like flies up and then kind of turns and like the background kind of doesn't move right. Like there's a couple of those shots where like it doesn't 100% look right, but I would say most of it still looks really good. Yeah, which is astounding. Yeah.
So it just like I said, and going back to this idea of the respect that they treated the material with, which is funny. In those interviews, Gene Hackman talked about how he was initially very reticent to take on the role. That was definitely a theme in some of these interviews, where Hackman in particular was like, I didn't know if this would tarnish my reputation as a serious actor. And I think for the public and for a lot of the actors, people in the industry, the Adam West Batman was like the closest comparison that they could make as to what this might be. So again, it really is truly astounding what they were able to achieve, especially at that point in time.
Yeah, no, it's cool, man. And like, I think a big part of it is Christopher Reeve. Like, I think he's like the secret ingredient in like making all this. I mean, obviously Gene Hackman and Margot Kidder, like everyone's bringing their A game, but like if you don't get Superman right in this, like it's that's like, I mean, I heard that they screen tested like Robert Redford and Stallone, and like, can you imagine Stallone? I mean, Stallone looks like ripped, but like I don't know if he would bring the same charisma that Christopher Reeve has.
Look, I'm maybe the biggest Rocky fan but I think they made the right call. But again, it's like you get it right at the time. They were just going through who the hot names were, but no, I think definitely going with an unknown makes sense for all of the reasons that are typically cited, right? It's easier for the audience to buy into them being this person when they don't have that baggage. And yeah, Christopher Reeve, again, this is the Donnerverse event, but you can't separate them. And of course, so much of why these movies, but this movie in particular, works is that Christopher Reeve performance. There's this magic and charm and earnestness to the performance that is just in its own league.
There's something I noticed. Well, I mean, I shall get into details of it, but like there was the big thing that I noticed this time watching it was that I was kind of comparing it to like what I remember of like Henry Cavill being Superman, and Henry Cavill's take is like a very like stoic, like very like he stands like perfectly straight and he's like postured all the time. You know what I mean? He's just like, where Christopher Reeve, like especially in the scene when he comes to talk to Lois on the balcony, Christopher Reeve has this like very relaxed confidence about him. Like he kind of like swaggers when he walks, and when he sits down, he's not sitting like perfectly straight. He's kind of like slouched over to one side, and like he just has this this air of being like very cool and confident and like relaxed. And that's something that I don't think we've seen with any other Superman portrayal, really, like what I thought about it. And it was like, he just seems so natural, like in the suit, like you don't get the vibe that he's like self-conscious about wearing tights. You know what I mean? Like he just like, and that suit, I know we've talked about previously you asked me what suit I thought was the best. And in the past I said the Henry Cavill Man of Steel suit, but like, while I maintain the suit as a suit hanging on a rack, I think the Henry Cavill one looks better. On the actor, I think this suit might be the best suit. Like, because Christopher Reeve, like, might be the only human being on the planet to look that good wearing that suit. But like, it is like, he looks like underwear and all, man, like red underwear and all. He looks like regal and like mythic wearing that costume. And it's like, there's really something special about the way he portrays the character.
You said it beautifully. There is totally this ease to him. Mm-hmm. He's unburdened by the weight of the world on his shoulders in the way that other depictions are. But yeah, just the way he carries himself and the suit, you're right. That's the thing. That's, like I say, the magic of this performance, because even just putting aside the physicality of it, the fact that he's not wearing this, padded, sculpted suit, like he's really wearing a pair of tights and he pulls it off. But in terms of,
and he's ripped too. Like you can see like through the tights, you can see his muscles. Like it's crazy impressive if you think about it,
Yeah. That's part of the, the behind the scenes material where he talked about when he auditioned, he was very skinny. He called himself a string bean. And, he put on like a big bulky sweater to make himself look as big as possible. And then he really committed himself to getting into the shape that he would need to be to pull this off the way he wanted to. And that's the thing in terms of wearing that costume, but also delivering some of the lines that he delivers about, I'm here for, to fight for truth, justice, the American way. There's just what could be laughable in the hands of someone else. It just works here.
Yeah.
It just works.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Like at the end when the prison warden's like, the world is safe thanks to you, Superman. And that guy delivers that line in like a very cornbally way, right? But like Superman's response is like, don't thank me. We're all part of the same team. Like he just has this like very like easy, like you're right. Like it's a very laughable line, but like he just pulls it off like so effortlessly, right? And like when he's talking to Lois, when he's flirting with Lois, he's like, I like pink very much, Lois, like it's like there's like an edge to him as Superman that I think is looked over by a lot of people. Like he's not the quote unquote Boy Scout that like I feel like everyone thinks like, yes, he's a very good person and he's like very like always does the right thing, but he has this like I don't want to say edge because I feel like that's not quite the right word, but like it's this like X factor that I think a lot of people overlook.
I've always referred to that, especially in that interview scene on the balcony, as slyness. He's kind of sly. When Lois says, do you have a girlfriend? And he's like, no, but if I did, you'd be the first to know.
Yeah.
This guy.
And how he's sitting in the chair, he's got like, he's like kind of like draped backwards and his cape is just kind of like flicked over the side. Like, yeah, it's very cool.
It's great. And when they're about to take off and Lois says, Clark says you're made up like Peter Pan. He's like, Peter Pan flew with children, Lois, in a fairy tale. It's, I mean, this guy is a smooth operator. So, and that, I love the balcony scene because that definitely shows you some different, angles to the character that maybe don't get as much of a chance to shine. Like when he's facing off with Lex, obviously, so like that really helped round out his character. So, no, I mean, it's as beautiful and pitch perfect a performance as you could ask for.
I'm glad you brought the Lex scene though, because I also think Christopher Reeve is a much tougher Superman than people give him credit for, because like when he goes and faces off against Lex, he's like, and Lex says to Otis, is like, hang up the man's cape. And Otis goes to like, and the Superman like mean mugs him down. He's like, I don't think he wants me to take his cape. Like, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of shades to Christopher Reeve Superman that I think people that haven't watched the movie a lot, like definitely get overlooked.
I want to ask you about ways in which your rewatch sort of challenged the views that you had previously. Like if there's anything that as you watched this, you were like, oh, I didn't remember it this way, or you looked at something differently. For me, one of the things was the Clark Kent persona. In my head, it was more like I remembered it being way more exaggerated and bumbling than it was. I mean, I don't want to say, oh, it was a very, reserved performance as Clark. He's still, bumping into stuff, but it wasn't as bumbling as I've always remembered it to be.
I think in the sequels, it's a lot more bumbling.
Yeah.
Like I remember, Superman 2, when he like trips into the fire and everything, I feel like the bumblingness is definitely more something from like the sequels that we're remembering. But yeah, in this, he's just kind of like a square guy, who's like, he's like a hick. He's almost like a hick is how they portray it, like, which is not something that I remember either, and with the swell and like, he's just very earnest. And I actually really did I kind of wish so this movie, my biggest kind of reevaluation of it was we always talked about how we like Superman being what he does and Clark is who he really is. And this movie kind of reverses that. But watching it again, this movie in particular, forget the sequels, just this movie itself, I don't really think we get that much of Clark Kent to make that much of a judgment call on it, right? Like Clark's really only in 3 scenes of this movie, as Clark. So it was a much smaller part of the role than I remembered.
Okay, so let's take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll unpack that more, because this speaks to I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but a little bit of an epiphany that I had about this movie that kind of ties into what you just said. So let's take a quick commercial break, and then we'll continue when we get back. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated full-service comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. Since 1983, this 9-time Eisner Award nominee uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material available. They pride themselves on their significant contemporary and vintage back issue selection. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available to anyone, anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I am an alum of these festivals, and I found them to be very enjoyable and well-run events. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news and updates about events, discounts, ticketing information, and more. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. A great friend of this show is one of our regular guests, Justin DeVoe. In recent years, Justin has embarked on a truly remarkable fitness journey, which you can see for yourself on Instagram at RealLifeLobo. And if you're looking for guidance in starting or continuing your own fitness journey, check out at Iron and Honor on Instagram. Flat Squirrel Productions is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions to save 10% on your order. Again, that's promo code FSP. It helps support the show too. Thanks. And we're back. So the other main issue that I've had with this movie all along is exactly what you were just describing, the fact that, and I know this stems from the pre-crisis incarnation of the character, I recognize that, but this depiction of him as Superman is really who he is, and Clark is the disguise. And one of the things that I had to remind myself of is what we talk about all the time, our perspective and how, the things that we read and watch, especially as we're growing up, so shape the way we look at these characters. And, for me, for both of us, but for me in particular, growing up reading the Triangle era comics, the template set by John Byrne post-Crisis, where Clark is who he is and Superman is what he can do, and that Clark Kent played football in high school, and he's a star reporter and novelist. This is a very capable Clark. Even watching, of course, the Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, played that up as well. Mm-hmm. Smallville was all about Clark. Even, to this day, watching the Superman and Lois show, where it's, really him on the farm as a family man, and then he goes off and he has these adventures. So, and the Snyderverse as well, really starting with that basis of Clark, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm always kind of looking at any of these stories through that lens. And in the sense, it's not fair, right? I can't really knock Superman the movie for taking a different approach. It's its own incarnation, and it was also at a different time, a time when in the comics that's how Superman was depicted. No,
I was going to say, because that was one of the things I wanted to say, was that this was very accurate to the comics of the time. Like the version we like was kind of redefined by John Byrne. So that's not to say that this is very valid in the sense that it was straight up what the character was,
Yes. And so, but here was the bigger revelation that I had that just shifted my perspective on this. In all of those modern stories that I just mentioned, I feel like it's the story of a man with the powers of a god. And he has to reconcile his heritage with his upbringing and really wrestle with and decide how he's going to use this power in the world. But he's the man with the power of a god. In Superman the movie, and in the pre-Crisis comics, but specifically in Superman the movie, I really feel like the intent is more that he's a god living among men. And it's a flip on that. And I kind of went into that rewatch with that sense. And it just gave me a different, sort of view of it and a different appreciation. And I enjoyed it more because I wasn't, previously I was watching those scenes of Clark and it rubbed me the wrong way because I'm like, oh, Clark is just this disguise for him. But it's like, well, that's the take on the character. It just clicked for me in a way that I don't think it really had before.
Well, it's interesting you say that though, because yes, to what you just said, the role reversal, you're totally right. It's about the superpowered being living among humans, but the god angle of it though, I really like that they don't play up religious imagery in this movie. You know what I mean? It's it's not he's not he doesn't feel this is a version of the character that does not feel the burden of being a messianic figure, right? It's he kind of just, it's what I always say about Superman. To me, the core of the character is he's a guy in the world trying to do the best with what he's got. And that could apply to both versions, the kind where he's a man with the powers of a god or a god living among men. I feel like that applies to both, right? It's this is what I can do and I'm going to do my best to help people with it, right? And and I think this movie, I like that it's less about him having a burden of not knowing what to do. You know what I mean? Where the Snyderverse leans really heavy into that, and I'm glad it does because, like I said, this version exists. So we want to have different interpretations, But this this very clean and simple sort of telling of him, but it's still, I think, hits really hard emotionally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. One thing I do want to ask you, and I know we keep mentioning the Snyderverse, but when you look at the Superman film franchises, no disrespect to Kirk Allen and those original movie serials and everything, but effectively we've had two. We've had the Christopher Reeve movies, and we've had the Snyder movies with Henry Cavill. So, and yes, we've had numerous television incarnations, but on the big screen, those are the two. And I feel like in a lot of people's criticism of the Snyderverse, oftentimes they invoke the Christopher Reeve version and how Snyder went in a different direction. So I feel like it's a natural segue to make, but I'm not asking you to speak for the other fans out there, but I mean, people really did seem to, not everybody obviously, but the critics of the Snyderverse and the Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, really seemed to have an issue with the fact that he was wrestling with what to do with his powers. I mean, that line from Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel about, should I have let those kids on the bus drown? He's like, maybe. I mean, people really had a problem with that. Like, is it just that some people like just prefer this unburdened character who just has these powers and uses them this way just because, and is not weighed down by the decision? Is it more like, I don't feel like it's as relatable, but is it more aspirational? Like, do people find that more appealing because it's like, well, he's not wrestling with it. What is it?
So I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here in this, but I'm not sure if it's going to 100% answer what you're saying, but I listen to Rob Liefeld's podcast a lot. And he was recently on one of his recent episodes talking about Superman, about how he thinks that character needs a shot in the arm because in the 70s when he was growing up, Superman was like the marquee character. And it's like, and he was saying it's his favorite DC character, and he thinks that Superman deserves to be like more well-loved and stuff. And I really was thinking about that, thinking like, yeah, Superman was way more popular than Batman for a really long time, until like about like the 80s, right? When Batman became that and really popular. And like a lot of people attribute that to the Frank Miller and the darkening of the character and whatnot. But I was kind of thinking about this in like the larger picture and of other superhero characters who are like Superman, like, because I've been rewatching Dragon Ball Z, and Goku is a very Superman-like character. And in My Hero Academia, there's a character called All Might who's a very Superman-like character. And these are characters who are like insanely popular, especially among like, the younger generation, like the teenagers and 20-year-olds, right? And part of me thinks that the reason those characters are so popular, like Goku and All Might, like a big factor of it, and why Superman used to be so popular, is that I think the fact of just leaning in and not being ashamed of what they are, right? Like All Might is the best version of a human you could possibly be. He's super powerful. He always wins. He kicks ass. He's everything you want a superhero to be. Goku's very much the same way. Like, he's ultra powerful. He gets he struggles and fights, but he ultimately always wins and always is ultimately the strongest and the best. And I think there's this wish fulfillment aspect to that of like, yeah, it's just so cool to see like the hero character that you love be the best, right? And I think that's why Batman's popular, because that's Batman, that is Batman. Like, I know he's just a guy, but in the narrative of like the modern stories, he's this unstoppable force that kicks the shit out of bad guys and like always wins. And Superman they've turned on him in the last 20 years of like trying to quote unquote make him relatable and give him problems and give him burdens. And like, I think that sort of pulls, like, if you look at the big picture of it, it definitely takes a lot of the wish fulfillment out of it. And like, just like the awe and like wonder of like spectacle of it, and like there's got to be a reason why Superman struggles with popularity, but like Goku doesn't, right? Like, there has to be a reason for that. They're like essentially the same archetype, and like, I don't know. I think the ashamedness of like Superman's like awesomeness by like a lot of like modern writers definitely contributes to why he's not as popular anymore. I think if people started like leaning into like what makes him awesome, then I think that would resonate. I don't know. That's just an observation. It might be totally off base, but it's something I've been thinking about like a lot, because I've been like kicking around an idea of like a Superman story to pitch one day. And it's just, I don't know. Like, I think there's something to it. There might be something there.
No, well said. I'm taking all of that in and processing that. I think there definitely could be something to what you said. It's interesting. I'm really thinking about this because you look at something like Superman and Lois, right? Where there's still internal tension, right? He's trying to juggle the family responsibilities with his responsibilities to the world, but it's not that ashamedness that you're talking about. And the show's very popular. So maybe there is something to be said for that.
Yeah. I mean, he's also not really like the main character of that show either. Like, that's like a ensemble show. So like, I think that a lot of the struggles are kind of put on the struggles is the wrong word, because it's not like characters have to have struggles. It's not, they can't just like have no. That's not what I'm talking about. But you're right. In that show, when Superman shows up, he kicks ass, and he's like, and he. I don't really think he ever questions like him being Superman, right? Like in the Snyderverse, that's a big plot point. Is like his like wrestling with, am I doing the right thing? Am I not? Like in Superman and Lois, it's like no, he knows what the right thing is, and he's got that mission, and the struggles are more like balancing that with his family life. Like that's where the tension comes from. So that might be maybe has something to do with that, because you're right. That show doesn't feel like they're ashamed of like what makes Superman cool.
Right. Now, all of that being said, I do find it relatable and engaging and compelling what we've gotten in the Henry Cavill movies, and we've talked about this. Me too. No, I know I know. Yeah. And we've discussed this, and those are stories that are unfolding in a more realistic modern world, and I think they do a great job of depicting what would happen if someone with this level of power from another planet existed. How would the world receive him? And so with that starting point, I think those stories flow naturally the way they should. But clearly the reaction to them has been mixed. Obviously we've seen that. I don't think anyone would dispute that. Whereas, and I always use this as the example, but it's like, it's a night and day difference. In Superman the movie, when Lois asks where he's from and he says Krypton, and she just asks him how you spell it, it's like,
yeah.
This is, either on this Earth in the Donnerverse, they're already aware of life on other planets, or it's just not a big deal for them. I don't know, but they're very different worlds that these characters are operating in. I think, though, on this note of internal tension, this is sort of another one of those areas where I have had a little bit of an issue with Superman the movie, but I think my new perspective of this God living among men in the context of this larger, more mythic, epic story have allowed me to accept it a little bit more, because I don't feel like, putting aside, like, right, he's not struggling with how he's going to, interact with the world so much, really. But even just this idea of internal tension, and people might disagree, but I don't feel like there's much of that in this movie. You get some instances, and actually, before I even get into that, let me just say, when I talk about this God living among men, I don't mean to say that the Superman of Superman the movie is this cold, distant, aloof being. Not that at all. The movie does humanize him, and of course, the performance adds so much warmth and humanity. So I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea about what I'm saying, but again, I don't feel like we have a ton of this internal tension. For me, I see it in the scene at Pa's funeral, right? All this power, and I couldn't save him. And then the decision to reverse time at the end of the movie after Lois dies. Now, there's one other instance in the special edition of the movie, which is the version we watched, which inserts the scene between Superman and Jor-El in the fortress after Superman has his first night in Metropolis saving everyone, and basically doesn't want to be Clark Kent anymore. And Jor-El is like, no, you have to maintain your secret identity. So you get a little bit of that tension there. But again, it doesn't drive, what is my point here? I guess my point is it doesn't drive the movie the way it does in the Snyderverse. And again, that's not a failing, but I think for me, viewing Superman the movie through that modern lens, I've always kind of seen it that way, but my perspective has shifted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I mean, do you agree, or do you feel like no, there's more tension that you're not seeing?
No, because I'm trying to take in everything you said too. Like, I actually think, like, part of me thinks that lack of tension though might be why people like the movie. Like, to what I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Though, like, because he, like, watching this movie, you want to be Superman, right? Like, it's totally like, like you wish you were Superman, like watching it, and like I think there's a lot to be said for that, like, especially for like younger kids. Like when I was a kid, like I wanted to be Superman. If I was 6 and I watched Man of Steel, I'm not entirely sure I would feel that way. I mean, I probably would, because the action scenes are like so awesome, but yeah, I really don't know like how the Snyderverse, like how that would affect like someone like in their, like, because I've only ever experienced it as an adult, so I'm very much a fan of both versions. I hope that's very clear to the audience, is that I'm a person who likes like having for characters like this, like a character like Superman that has had so many different authors, so many different artists, it's not like, this is not a character that was like born of like one artist and author's vision, right? Or one creative team's vision. This is a character that's been adapted basically since day one. So like, I'm very much a fan of seeing different takes and different versions, like things, that are more, like properties that are basically made by one person that have never changed, like that. Like things like that, I feel like I'd be a little more like tight about, but yeah, something like Superman like is definitely an adaptable character for like all generations.
Yeah, no, and I too am a fan of both. I guess, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I guess it's just fascinating to me. It's not so much why do people like Superman the movies? No, I get that. I guess it's more, especially for the detractors of the newer movies. It's like why? I guess. Because I look at what we've gotten in the newer movies, and obviously the circumstances are different. I don't have the same experience, but I do find it, to me, it's very relatable, but more so inspiring for someone to choose to use his powers when the world is against him, basically, versus a story where the world instantly accepts him. But again, like you said, I mean, maybe that lack of tension is part of the appeal, that it's just kind of this good and simple and pure character and telling. And it's more just about how he goes about his adventures. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. No. I mean, this, like we said, this is like a perfect movie, like in a lot of ways. I mean, we I feel like we've talked so much, we haven't really even gotten into the movie yet proper,
Yeah, no. And on that note, so I think this is a perfect time to do so. This really is a movie in 4 acts with 4 distinct settings. Of course, we begin on Krypton. We have our sequence in Smallville. We have Clark and Superman's arrival in Metropolis. And then, of course, we have the big climax in California. Mm-hmm. I will say, going back to what we were talking about before, I agree with you that the movie doesn't lean into the messianic imagery the way other movies do. Like, we don't see him in a Christ pose.
Yeah.
But this is it's so biblical, just the beats of this story. And I'm not breaking new ground on this, and we've even talked about it on the show before, but from the father sending his son to Earth to save it.
You see him when he's a teenager, then you see him at 30.
Exactly. He's, he learns the trade of his father, who works with the earth, carpenter, farmer, not too far apart. Like you said, there's this long, we visit with him once in his adolescence, and then he emerges as an adult. Like Jesus, he shows up, he performs miracles, right, in Metropolis, that first night of saves. And like Jesus, he's tempted in the desert. In this case, it's to use his powers to save Lois. It's not the devil tempting him, but that temptation of using his powers in a way that he's been forbidden. So I feel like it hits, it hits a lot of those. It does hit a lot of those same beats. But again, I think that just supports this overall very, very, mythic, epic scope of the story. And again, the fact that we have these 4 distinct acts and settings, it really does give it that epic feel. Is there of those 4 acts, do you have a favorite? Is there a certain setting that you really enjoyed you spending time?
Well, I really like when Clark and Superman show up in Metropolis, which I did want to dive into that whole thing, but I love the Smallville part of this movie. Like, I absolutely love it. I love that you see that Clark is kind of dorky, like, which I totally forgot about that. Like, in this movie, is that like, even before he adopts like the Clark Kent persona, he's still kind of like an outsider, kind of like a geek, right? Like, and he's like the team, the football team's like, I don't know, like
equipment manager, I guess.
Yeah, equipment manager. Yeah. And like you get like a little tension with Lana, and then like that whole scene when he's running past the train and then like jumps the rails in front of the train, and then like the shot when you see the bully and Lana and all his friends like driving their car up past his house, and then you see in a distance like him running, like you see the 2 trails of like dirt being kicked up, and then they pull up and they pull up from, they're like, Clark, how did you get here so fast? He's like, I ran. Like, as part of that like swagger we were talking about, it's a very cool take on Superman, And then when they drive away and his dad gives him the speech about you are here for a reason, like that scene gives me chills every time I've seen it. I've seen this movie like 100 times and I love that scene, man. It adds that mythic quality. Like,
yeah, I think you and I our views align on this. The debut in Metropolis is definitely the high point of the movie, but I too love the Smallville stuff. I mean, look, you and I are huge fans of the Smallville TV show. The thing in recent years, and especially with this rewatch, what stands out to me is, the creators of Smallville, and yes, I know there were a lot of Superboy stories that perhaps served as some inspiration as well, but clearly the movie was a big influence on the Smallville TV series in a number of ways. And I always think it's like, this was like a 10-minute sequence in the movie and they built a 10-year series out of it. But even in just those 10 minutes, and you just talk about the efficiency, but the effectiveness of the storytelling, it's only a few scenes in Smallville. It's, there's not a ton of time here, but it hits all those beats that would again form the basis for Smallville. The alienation that he feels, the frustration of not being able to use his powers in the way that he wants to. Like he tells Pa Ken, he's like, is it a crime for a bird to fly? Like it's doing what it can do, what it's meant to do. And so it really just hits on all of those themes that would be the basis for the series. And it's amazing what they were able to extrapolate from that small period.
And even like when Clark says, he's like, I ran, and then they drive away and he's like feeling himself. He's like smiling and he's like, Brad, you dick, and his dad's like fixing the car and he's like, been showing off again, haven't you, son? Like immediately like smacking him down. Like, don't be an asshole. Just because he's an asshole doesn't mean you can be an asshole, like it's really amazing what especially with his dad in like, it's like 2 scenes that his dad has, like literally it's like 2 shots. And then when he dies and like, you just like, the look on his face, like the acting in this movie is so good. Like his dad, like when he starts having the heart attack, you see that look on his face, like, oh no. And he's like looking around, like trying to take like one last look at like everything. Like he looks at the house, he looks at Clark, he looks at like the barn, and like before he dies, it's really sad.
It is. And again, going back to the Smallville TV show, we see that echoed when Jonathan passes on that show too. It's a wordless goodbye when Clark and Martha find him out in the field there, out by the barn, and he just looks at both of them. It's not a big speech or anything like that. It's just this look, this farewell look before he passes. So yeah, no, I've always loved that sequence, and the scene. There are a few moments in the movie that I really have always felt moved by. Some on Krypton, which we would talk about, but certainly Clark at Jonathan's grave and just that line about like all these powers, all these things I can do, and I couldn't save him. I mean, like I said, for the most part, I don't feel like there's a ton of that internal tension in the movie, but that's a really pivotal moment and a key point in his development, and beautifully rendered in the movie.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important scene too, because that like is a scene that shows that like he's not a god. He's like literally like just someone who can do amazing stuff, but that doesn't mean like he can solve every single problem. And you know what I mean? Like it's definitely like in one little scene, it's very poignant to like the limits of his like abilities.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting then when you get to the end of the movie and he's faced with the same dilemma, but now he sort of pushes past the limitation on his power and is able to save Lois. I don't know. I guess there's still some more to unpack.
I don't love the time travel aspect of this movie. I will say that I know we keep saying this is a perfect movie, but that's like that. And there's one other scene in the movie that I feel like I don't like love. I don't love the notion of him like turning time backwards.
But what's because I want to make sure we don't overlook it. What's the other one? Oh,
the poem that Lois says when they're flying. I think that's insane. Like that was in the
movie. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I have to say though, as much as it was very moving, the scene at the funeral, Clark's goodbye to Martha really, really got me. I mean, first of all, between we haven't even talked about the music yet, but between the score and just that wide sweeping shot of the field and the two of them out there, and Martha, of course, you feel. I mean, on top of losing her husband, now her son is departing, So you really feel for her, and it is this quiet strength that she has, right? Like she knows this time was coming and she expresses that to him. But when she says, remember us, always remember us. Oh man, it got me.
Oh dude. Yeah. Yeah. No, that again, now being like an adult and watching this now with like my parents are older now. And like, just like those scenes just hit so hard for me. Like they're like really sad, there's like a really like emotional sadness in that Smallville part for sure.
We just signed up our son for preschool, and so very different levels, but it's one of those weird things, like, because we've been with him every day for the first 2.5 years, and now he's going to go off to preschool in the fall. And it's like, he's going to go off and have adventures now, and we're not going to be there for, like, it's this weird thing. And so that's just a small version, of what, like, she's like, her son is leaving. She doesn't know if she'll see him again. On that note, like, I know when Clark shows up at the Daily Planet and he gets the job, he makes the request of Perry to have money sent to his mother. Mm-hmm. But we never see them visit again.
Yeah.
Watching that scene, and I don't know that this was necessarily the intent, but it felt like a very permanent goodbye.
Goodbye. Which, watching it again, it's a little weird that, like, my dad died and my mom is going to be all alone, and like, I'm just going to leave her. Like, it's a little weird. Like in that context, it's a little weird, but like, but it's like he's got the calling, and his dad told him, "You're here for a reason," and that spurred him on. Like, I get why, but you're right. It did feel like a very permanent goodbye, and it would have been nice to have like a tag up again when he comes back, maybe before he goes to Metropolis. But when they cut to Metropolis, it's such a good transition though, that like, I don't know where you would shoehorn that in,
That's the thing. And so it was just weird. It was just something that I thought about that had never really registered before. But watching that again, like I said, it just had this air of finality to it. It felt like more than, I know you're going to be gone a long time figuring out what you need to, but I'll see you when you get back. It really was just like remember us, remember this town. Like, and the fact that, all we really have to go by is what's presented in the movie, and the fact that we never see him and he goes back to Smallville, but in the non-Donner movies, right? In 3 and 4, in the Donner movies, like, that's it. So I don't know, just based on that, yes, he's sending her money, but it's like, I don't know, did he have much? Now maybe someone is listening to this, like, of course he visited his mother, but I'm just saying.
He had to. He had to give her like phone calls and stuff. He had to.
Like,
at least for nothing else to explain the checks. For nothing else to explain the money that's coming.
Yeah. I'll chalk that up to it being an off-screen thing. But I'm just saying, in between the mood of that scene and the lack of any subsequent interaction, the thought crossed my mind of like, oh, did he never talk to her again? But again, I hope that's not the case. I don't necessarily think it is.
I think the real question I got to ask you is, how many bowls of Cheerios did you eat when you were a kid? Because that's what Superman ate. That glorious product. Dude, every time watching that movie when I was a kid, every single time when that scene would come up and you'd see the box of Cheerios lit ever so like purposefully, my dad, I'd always hear him say to my mom, wonder how much they pay to get that box in there. Like every time it was like, I wonder how much Cheerios pay to get that box in there.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. Oh, so we jumped over the Krypton portion of the story. What's your take on that?
I really liked it, man. Like, especially this time, like watching it again, like I was trying to like think because this is a version of Krypton that was never in the comics as far as I know, like this iced up version of Krypton being an ice planet. And like, it was I feel like now it's like, well, yeah, that's what Krypton looks like. And when we talked about Superman Lives, we thought it was like, oh, it's so great to get away from the crystals and stuff. But looking at it through the lens of like, they made this up, it's like, it's a cool take on Krypton. Like the ice planets, like the iridescent like suits that they're wearing, the fact that the S symbol is like his family's crest, and everyone has a different symbol. I think that was new for this movie. Like, I think they just came up with some really cool stuff that's like embedded in the Superman lore now,
That was one thing in particular I wanted to ask you as an artist, the visual language of this movie. Obviously, the Krypton and Smallville and Metropolis acts in this movie, they each have their own feel and look. They each have their own aesthetic, and I think that lends itself. I really think that helps the pacing of the movie because it's not a short movie. And, the special edition that we watched, which was the early 2000s, Donner supervised the assembly of this cut, which included, I think, 8 minutes of footage that wasn't in the theatrical version, including Lex putting Superman through that gauntlet of tests when Superman went to confront him. And like I said, the scene of Clark and Jor-El after the first night of saves and a few other pieces here and there. So it's not a short movie, but I don't know, even for all the times we've watched, like it doesn't feel long. And I think that the very distinct act breaks that we get really do help move it along. But again, as far as the ice crystal motif of Krypton and the fortress, which again, Smallville and other iterations would utilize, even it's funny when Clark, after he leaves the farm, he throws the green crystal and it lands in the snow, and then the fortress emerges. I mean, that did the same thing in Smallville when he assembles the crystals and he throws it. So it's like it created this visual language that has lived on, and it becomes so identified with those pieces of mythology.
And it's so different from what came before it. Like if you look at the comics of that era, like it's the comics feel very Flash Gordon-y, right? Like of that era, like they're very like headbands and like tights and capes and like flying saucers and stuff like that. Like it's a very different, unique take that I think people don't like. I feel like really don't give enough credit to this movie of like how different that was, like an idea. Yeah. Especially the symbols, man. The symbol being not an S that his mom makes to call him Superman, but like that's what his parent, like what all the people on Krypton, like that was this family symbol. That's something that's definitely like taken hold in the character, like in all iterations, pretty much.
I do appreciate that touch, especially, last year on the podcast, we did our deep dive into the various tellings of the origin. And in the very, very beginning, he shows up in Metropolis without a name, yet he has the costume with an S on it. And then he's named Superman. So it's like, what? How does that work? Why would he have put that on him to begin with? Yeah. And then not long after, we would get the origin fleshed out a little bit, and the Kents would be introduced, and we would see that they had a role in his upbringing. And as, the one that stands out to me in one of the tellings as Pa is passing, he tells him, like, you're a Superman. And so it's like, all right, at least he says the word, and that would account for why he would put the S on his chest. But yeah, no, I definitely like the idea of the family symbol. I thought that works. Mm-hmm. That works well and helps account for why he would show up with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, the ice, the ice crystal motif, I think works really nicely, knowing that the Smallville sequence is coming after it, because you get this really nice juxtaposition of those the whites versus the warmth of Smallville. So I thought that was cool. One of the things in the behind the scenes material, they talked to Marlon Brando, right? So Brando famously did not memorize his lines, right? He had them all written on cue cards. And that's why I always chalk that up to, like, man, laziness, right? And he could get away with it, right? Because he's Marlon Brando. And it's like, hey, you want me in the movie? Put up cue cards.
Yeah.
And maybe that's it. But I'm going to choose to take this at face value. In the interviews, he talked about how there was actually an acting reason for it. I don't know if you've ever come across this in any of his interviews, but the idea was that he wanted it to feel more spontaneous, right? People, as we're talking, like you and I are doing now, sometimes we're searching for words, it's like not rehearsed. And so that was sort of the idea, where he, as the actor, would literally be looking for his words just as a person would be.
I noticed it in this one. It has eyes like darting around and like looking down and like taking like breaks. I did notice but he was great in this though, dude. Brando was great. And he's got great head of hair in this movie. Like his hair looks so good. Like when I'm old, I want my hair to look that great. Like just that, like that white, thick, like white, like the curl in the front. Like,
yeah, no, for sure.
Looks cool as hell. Yeah.
I'm very partial to the Russell Crowe Jor-El, but this is an iconic take on the character, and he, whatever you want to say about how much he was paid for the small amount of screen time, but he added so much legitimacy to the movie. He and Gene Hackman, right? Once they had those two attached. and we haven't even talked about the Salkins yet, who the ones who acquired the rights and made this happen in the first place. But he brought such gravitas to the role, and it's such a pivotal piece to kick off the movie and to really anchor it and give it that emotional weight. So yeah, I think he was the right fit for this.
Oh, totally. Yeah. No, and like he actually looks like Christopher Reeve's dad too, which is like that's the crazy part. Like, in some of these movies, like when they cast parents, they don't look like they're related at all. Like he looks like he's related to him. Looks legit. I love that Laura is like 20 years younger than him.
Well, ever since you talked about that, I think when we were doing the Superman and Lois episode, right, when you were like, "Why is Jor-El always like so much older?"
So old, yeah.
I know. Now I always think about that.
It's probably because of Brando's take. That's probably why every take afterward is because they got Brando and they're like, "Oh yeah, okay, he's old. Yeah, that the awesome white hair. So we got to have everyone else be older." Yeah,
no, for sure. I do. I mean, I love that we open with Jor-El banishing Zod and Non and Ursa. And obviously, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about the Donner cut of Superman 2, but obviously they were initially filming those two movies together, so they knew where they were going. But even that aside, I mean, it works very well to set up the threat in the next movie, but also just to give you some other flavor of what's going on Krypton beyond Jor-El trying to warn them. I thought that it was a very effective way to kick things off.
Yeah. And then the Phantom Zone, that like mirror thing, that's always embedded in my head too. Of like, that's the Phantom Zone, man. It's this like weird mirror that just smashes into you and like sucks you into the
yeah. Again, more of that visual language. Jor-El, of course, gives this speech as they're putting baby Kal-El in the rocket. I was definitely moved by this. These are the same words that Brandon Routh, Superman, will say to his son Jason in Superman Returns. But the line in particular, because you and I have talked about this before, and I knew eventually we would get to this episode, but the son becomes the father, and the father the son. What is your take on this? I know we've talked about this before, especially after rewatching.
I don't get it.
No,
I don't get. I mean, the son. I get the son becomes the father, but I don't get the father the son. That's the part that I don't get. Do you get it? Especially like why he's saying it to I what's your take on it?
Okay. First of all, I think kind of the brilliance of this line is that you can look at it in different ways. So I think that's actually it's like I think you can interpret it differently. I know I mentioned this to you before. In the Supergirl TV show, it was in the context of Martian Manhunter and his father who was suffering from dementia. And it was sort of this idea of now Jean is becoming the caretaker. And so like the role is switching. So it's sort of in that context. But here, I mean, the son becomes the father. All right. So we have Jor-El has a son. So he previously was a son himself. Now he's had a son. He's a father.
I get that part.
And the father, the son, I mean, I think you can look at it in different ways, but like you sort of live on through your son. So it's like, in a way, you become your son.
Okay. Yeah. I'll buy it. Yeah. That makes sense.
It's just a great line though. Either way, regardless.
It is a good line. Yeah. It is a good line. Yeah.
I really do think it is the sense of that, like living on through.
Okay. Oh, well, that does make sense because he knows that they're dying and he's sending the kid off to like basically live on for Krypton. Like, I mean, okay, you know what? You sold me. I think that's what it means.
Yeah. No, I do think that works. Oh, one thing that I thought of, and this kind of ties into the lengthy programming sequence that Clark undergoes at the Fortress, where he's there for 12 years. But have you ever listened to the old radio show, the old Superman radio show?
No, I haven't.
So I've only listened to a little. I've just dabbled, and I talked about this when we did our Origins exploration. But they told the origin on the radio show a couple of times, or at least a couple of times. But the first version of it in the very beginning was baby Kal-El leaves Krypton and adult Superman steps out on Earth. So he grows to adulthood in the rocket. And it's so funny because like he comes out and he's in the costume and he immediately saves this like little kid and his grandfather. And the kid's like, you should get a disguise and you should call yourself Clark Kent. And like, that's how the whole thing unfolds. But he comes out of it fully formed. And obviously I'm grateful that the movie didn't fall into that, because I think that's not the way forward. But it's like, I'm almost surprised they didn't. Like, he's getting all these lessons in the rocket on his way to Earth, and then he has that lengthy programming sequence. I guess I am grateful that they gave us that 10-minute Smallville sequence. That really went a long way, because otherwise I feel like we sort of fall into the territory of that original radio show origin. Because again, that leads to really when we're getting more specific about the movie, the biggest hang up I've had specifically in the film is the fact that he spends all of those years in the fortress under the tutelage of Jor-El, being told about the human heart without actually having experiences that teach him that. I've never been able to get over this.
Well, I never really read it as that he was just in the fortress all those years either.
Really?
Like, because like, well, yeah, because like, don't they say like our journey through the galaxy and everything? Like I took it that like it was just he was like training with Jor-El, but like he wasn't like locked in the fortress the whole time. Like I assumed he like went back to like Kansas a couple times to his mom, and like I don't know. I never got the. Maybe I'm totally misreading that, but like I feel like it's like ambiguous as to like what exactly they're doing.
Interesting. That is counter to the way I've always interpreted it, but
well, I mean, do you see it as him like in the because he says we journey through the stars now. Does he go into a ship and go through like is he like space traveling, or is it all just like data in like a computer essentially? It's really ambiguous. Like, where does he get the costume? If there's like, if he's not, you know what I mean? Does that just like materialize? I feel like there's a bunch of ways. I feel like you could headcanon a bunch of stuff from that.
Maybe you can. And look, hey, maybe I'm totally off in my view of this. But I mean, I do agree that there is some ambiguity in terms of how it's presented. I mean, Jor-El says like, I think he says like, we'll leave the confines of your earthly body. I always took it as this idea of like I mean, I don't know, this is not a great explanation, but like his consciousness is sort of merging with the AI in the fortress, and he's, you know, seeing all of these things. But I never took it as like he's physically going out anywhere. Like it really seemed to me like, I don't think I don't think he was literally standing there for 12 years, but but I think it was that, again, that there was some sort of like something somewhat metaphysical where there was like this consciousness meld, and he was having these experiences. But I mean, Jor-El is like ticking off the years. He's like, another year has passed and 5 years have now passed.
Well, like I always imagined it that he was like training too, like fight training, and like it wasn't just like you're saying just standing there. Like I thought, like I mean, clear like he had to have like eaten food, you know, and like slept, and like I feel like it's purposefully ambiguous, because I think I truly think that sequence is just to be like, okay, this is how we turn him into Christopher Reeve, as like, you know what I mean? I feel like there's speaking of that, how did you feel about the actor playing teenage Clark Kent not being Christopher Reeve? Because they kind of look like the same age, like, you know what I mean? Like,
I thought you were going to say, how do I feel about them dubbing over his voice? But
wait, what?
They dubbed. So Jeff East played young Clark, and they dubbed over his voice with Christopher Reeve.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh wow, I know that.
Yeah.
Wow, they did a good job, because I didn't notice like any lip sync off or anything.
Yeah, there's like one clip. I found one clip on YouTube that I think was from a deleted scene or something, where you actually hear Jeff East's voice, like his actual voice, for like a little snippet of a scene. I mean, it didn't sound radically different than Christopher
Yeah, I was
Reeve.
gonna say, yeah.
But no, I
mean, they look like the same age. Like, they just look like two different people. They're like the same age.
All right, fair point on that. But I do like that they're played by different actors, because I feel like it makes for a very cool reveal when we we kind of go through the Jor-El mask and we see Christopher Reeve standing there. It's like this big moment. I feel like that would have been, well, now counterpoint to that, it would have been the first time you see him in the costume, so that still would have had impact. But I think the fact that it's like, okay, like now he's here. And that's another thing too. You got to give the movie credit for delaying his reveal as long Superman, as it's like you don't see Christopher Reeve until that deep into the movie. And even then, yes, you see him in the costume, but he's so far away and he just flies by quickly. It's like you have to wait a few more scenes before he saves Lois.
Yeah, no, but it's actually, I thought you were going to talk about the reveal of seeing him as Clark Kent, because that's actually a cool reveal too. Because like you're like following Jimmy's camera, and then like you follow Lois in, and then like it kind of turns around to like reveal Christopher as Clark Kent. So yeah, you're right. That it was a good choice to do that.
But wait, I like what you said about the fortress training, because I've always been hung up on this. It only, like I said though, my God Among Men thing helped me get past that. Because Jesus probably went through something similar. He probably went out into the desert and he got whatever, downloaded as well. But like, maybe I have been taking it too literally. I really feel like the intent of the movie is like he's in there that whole time. But I don't know. I'm open to a different interpretation.
But I mean, like, like in Birthright, how like he's going around like to like Africa and like everything. Like I feel like you could headcanon that in here though. Like he could be walking around with that crystal and like listen to the crystal talking as he's like doing adventures, Maybe.
And you know what? In fairness, so one of the things that has been well documented at this point in terms of the making of this movie, right? They were originally making 1 and 2 together. There was a lot of tension between the producers, the Salkins and Richard Donner. Even in those, behind the scenes featurettes on the Blu-ray, they talk about how
they like talk shit about each other.
Yeah, well, apparently the Salkins were forever telling Donner that he was over budget and behind schedule, but they had never given him a budget or a schedule. So he was kind of, flying blind. There was a lot there. And then of course they would replace him on Superman 2. But the point is there was so much that they had to accomplish on a very tight shooting schedule, with money issues, with making really a new kind of movie on a very epic scale. So, maybe that really was more of a, kind of an artistic choice to not have to film him traveling the world, but to still sort of show that he's learning and developing and growing. Maybe I have always taken it too literally. I have to think about that.
As my parents would always say when I was growing up, and I feel like this has served me very well as a watcher of movies now, is that whenever I'd have like a plot hole question or something, I'd be like, what does that mean? Why did that happen? Whatever. My mom would always say, like, you're not supposed to ask those questions. Don't worry about it. I know that like a lot of writers would probably hear that and be like, oh no, you got to always answer. But like I feel like you'll enjoy movies a lot more if when you butt up against things, you're just like, nah, you're just not supposed to ask that. Like where does he get the costume in this movie? Not supposed to ask that question. Don't move on.
I feel like he was just in a crystal chamber this whole time while his mind was traveling the cosmos, and the AI in the fortress was like sewing this costume while he was in suspended animation. You know what? In terms of character and just the story, the reason why it always bothered me was just, I feel like it just undercuts any character development or evolution if he's just told all of these things. It just, to me, makes him feel so much more removed from humanity if he hasn't been out there in the world learning and experiencing these things for himself. Like, that's the problem I've always had with it. And I said this when we did our Superman and Lois episode, but I thought, even though I didn't love that they sent Tyler Hoechlin's Clark to the fortress for what seemed to be about 10 years or so, I felt that they split the difference nicely, because when he's done training with Jor-El and he's shifted from the teenager who goes up there to Tyler Hoechlin, Jor-El is like, okay, now you need to decide what you want to do with your powers and why you want to use them to help people, right? So it's like, okay, you've had all of this training with me, but you still need to get back out there into the world. Like, I thought that split the difference nicely, as opposed to here where it's just like, okay, you're Superman now.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's true.
It is what it is. And it does. That's the thing though. The God Among Men thing helped me get over this, because there is this, it's a different version, and there is something, again, a little bit more, again, magical or metaphysical or whatever you want to call it, of him going through this experience. Like, it's not an earthly experience that he's going through. This is not Birthright. This is not Man of Steel. Like, he's not, again, unless we do subscribe to your theory and he is out there walking around with the crystal, maybe. But if that's not the case, right, he's not having these earthly adventures. He's really going on a different journey, a God's journey. And now he's going to live among men in his disguise. I think in that context, it works. It's not my preferred version, but I can get behind it.
Yeah, you can accept it as a different take.
Yeah. So anything about Krypton or Smallville that we didn't talk about that you wanted to before we shift to the Metropolis?
No, I think we're good. Yeah.
Did you like New York as the stand-in for Metropolis?
Straight up New York, complete with the Statue of Liberty.
It's just New York. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think it added a realism to the movie. Like we were talking about like Batman '89, how they like made a Gotham on the soundstage, which on one hand does, yes, give a very cool, distinct feel to that of being this very fantastical, like unique world, which is very cool. I love Batman '89. I'm not taking away from that. But like the using of New York in this made it feel very like grounded and modern and real, you know? Like that's the thing that I found so interesting about this movie was that it wasn't trying to be like a timeless throwbacky kind of movie where like, yeah, they're using like 70s technology, but there's like 1940s cars and stuff. Like it wasn't like doing that. It was like straight up just like a movie of 1978. You know what I mean? Like it was like a modern, as real as we can make it movie of 1978, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do appreciate that as well. And there's something about 70s movies. I feel like they don't feel as dated as like an 80s movie. You know, like certain 80s movies. It's like, oh man, it feels so
like the 80s,
so specific to that period of time. And with 70s stuff, I feel like, yes, it's
a little grittier.
Yeah. Like it definitely has a specific feel, but there's more of a timelessness to it than say
people,
like movie.
I noticed that like people didn't look as like pretty and perfect in 70s movies as like in later movies. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know if that was like the styling of the time or just like makeup techniques or whatever, but like I feel like usually in these movies they try to make everyone look as like immaculately perfect as possible, and like a lot of these people in these movies, like this movie's particularly, look like real people, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So, all right, talking about this incarnation of Clark. So I think the movie very much does support the notion that Clark is his disguise. I really feel like that's reasonable to conclude. For no other reason than when we get to that scene between Superman and Jor-El in the fortress after he's made all those saves, and Jor-El's like, okay, you've revealed to the world. So, all right, I'm jumping ahead, but it's all right. We're an hour and 45 minutes in. We'll just plow ahead here. So that scene in the fortress, right, which didn't even make it into the theatrical cut, which is bonkers to me. But that scene in the fortress where Jor-El is like, okay, you're revealed to the world, so be it. What's your take on that? Did Jor-El not intend for him to be revealed to the world? Like, what does the so be it mean?
Honestly, I don't really think that hard about it. I don't have a take on that one either way. I actually kind of get why it wasn't in the movie, to be honest with you, because like you end that sequence on such a high that I feel like the pacing of that movie and that clip in there, like kind of it has like a weird like stall in like the momentum of the movie, to me. But I think it's a cool scene, and I think it's like I feel like it's there. I feel like that movie is there to explain to people why he's not Superman all the time. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that's like essentially why that movie's there. That's in there. I don't know. What's your take on him being like, so be it?
I don't really know what to make of so be it, because it's like, look, you trained this kid for 12 years and you put him in a suit. What did you think he was going to do? So the so be it sounds like, oh, I didn't intend for you to do this, but maybe there's a different interpretation of that. But so, okay, this is interesting. This cuts both ways. I agree with you. I think in terms of pacing, it probably did stick out a little bit, and maybe that's why it was cut. But the reason why I like it is, and again, look, this goes back to more of the humanity that I want to see in the character, right? Or that internal tension that I want to see in the character. Because I was thinking about this, absent that scene, there are no scenes of like Clark at home Clark talking honestly to Martha. There's nothing where he's truly just himself or at quote unquote at home, either in a Metropolis apartment or at the fortress. Again, it just, like I said, this magical kind of quality. It's like you only see him existing when he's pretending to be Clark, when he's saving. It's just, I don't know. It's interesting to me, but so that's why I did appreciate that scene, because it's like, okay, you get a sense of what he's actually going through at this point in time. But what's so funny to me about that scene, and the reason I brought it up, is Jor-El's quick to say, it's like, okay, you're revealed, but you have to maintain your secret identity. And Superman's like, why? It's like, obviously this is not the line, but I feel like he was thinking it's a real pain in the ass to be this Clark Kent guy. I like knock into stuff all the time. I'm always bumping into people and doors. It's like, it's a lot of work. But yes, you're right. Jor-El gives him these explicit reasons why he needs to do it, right? Because humanity will abuse its resources, and they'll rely on you too much, and your enemies will know to attack you through your loved ones. The first one, though, did it make you think of Lex Luthor at all? Not in this movie, but in subsequent depictions. It's just
what do you mean?
When Jor-El is like, if you're Superman 24 or 28 hours a day, and Superman's like, oh, it's 24 hours on Earth. But when, if you're Superman all the time, it's humanity's habit to abuse their resources. It just made me think of Lex, because in more modern tellings, there's been this idea that Lex has espoused that Superman's very presence inhibits humanity's development, right? They won't strive to achieve more because they know Superman is there, right? To help them, to save them, whatever it might be. That his very presence limits the growth of humanity. I know that's not specifically, it's a different angle with Jor-El, but it just kind of made me think of that. Like it gets at this larger idea of what his presence in the world would actually do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like, I feel like why the scene was cut a little bit was because, again, I don't know, but like him, like with Superman being like, why do I have to be Clark Kent? I feel like doesn't fit with like the rest of the character, how they're showing him. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's, and like you're saying, like giving reasons, like it just feels like, I think it like opens the door to too many like logic questions. Whereas if like you don't show that and you just accept that, like, oh yeah, he's Clark and he's Superman, I feel like it basically opens up more questions, I think, having that scene in there.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong. Yeah. I think that does account for what's so funny though. It gets at these larger questions about his role in the world. It shows some of the internal tension. That's the stuff that I want.
You love. Yeah,
I love that scene. Yeah. But I get but you're right. But you're right though. I don't think that necessarily fits.
I'm not saying I think it should be cut. I'm saying I think why it was cut.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No. I hear you.
Yeah.
So again, going back to Smallville, and like we said, we get that great reveal of Clark. And like I said earlier, he was not as bumbling as I remembered. Here's one thing I wanted to ask you though, because I know, again, you and I both grew up with the modern Clark, who's the football star and the ace reporter and the star novelist and all that stuff. I mean, on the spectrum, like between like the nerdy bumbling Clark and the Byrne Clark, like what's the sweet spot for you?
I mean, Tyler Hoechlin's is like, I know we talked about it in Superman Lois, but I love like the dorky level of Tyler Hoechlin, like, because I feel like it's like realistic and earnest, Yeah, I feel like that's a sweet spot right in the middle, because I feel like if you make him too cool, I mean, it's already like a stretch that nobody recognizes that he's Clark and Superman, like, and he looks exactly the same. Like, even with the glasses, like, he looks like the same guy. Like, so it's already a stretch. So if you make Clark like a super like cool, strong, powerful, authoritative person as well, then I feel like that only hurts his disguise even more. So, I like the idea of Clark being a little dorky, but not like over the top.
Yes.
Like Tyler Hoechlin's version, I think, is my favorite interpretation of like the Clark Superman dynamic.
I agree. This is sort of ever evolving for me, because obviously I grew up with a specific version, but watching Christopher Reeve in particular, and his version is not the sweet spot for me, but it did make me think about something. I really do think there's something to the idea of Clark being overlooked and dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
It does a couple of things, right? It creates that dichotomy where he's Superman, all eyes are on him, and when he's Clark, he's easily cast aside. So I think that's interesting, but also it does sort of help establish why, as Superman, he has the empathy and the humanity and the kindness that he does, because it's not the same level. He's not part of a marginalized group of society, but he does know what it's like to be overlooked and for people not to care or pay attention. And so I think that adds something to what he does as Superman. So I do kind of like that. I think that, look, you and I always go back to Birthright, but I think Birthright did a nice job where, he's just kind of like this quiet, quiet, unassuming loner. And, the classic scene where they all go out to for drinks after work, right? And they tell him a different bar or whatever it is. And it's like, he's just kind of shy and quiet. So I think that's sort of, for me, probably the sweet spot, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they did some great things in like when he's walking out of the Daily Planet with Lois after their first day, and some guy runs into Lois and they're like, "Hey, how you doing, Lois?" And Lois is like, "Oh, this is Clark Kent." And he goes like, "Hey, nice to meet you." And the guy's like, "Yeah, okay," and just walks away. like little gags like that, or like when he's waiting for the elevator and there's two people walking by, he's like, "Good night," and they just like totally ignore him. Like they definitely did a lot of good subtle things that I didn't notice in previous, or at least it didn't clock. I didn't really latch onto.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because yes, he's a little clumsy, but ultimately, he's just really earnest. It's so funny. He's just like greeting people. He's just forever just trying to say hello and goodbye to people. And it's like, they have no time for him.
Or when he's standing in front of the TV and he's like, "Hey, did you guys see Lois?" And they're like, "Nah, she's not here." "Hey, you're in front of the set, Clark."
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess Jor-El probably had how many years in the Fortress tutorial do you think Jor-El spent on journalism and typing? Because Clark just comes in and he hits the ground running. That was probably, I want to say Jor-El carved out 6 months out of the 12 years.
Well, we got to remember also this is the 70s. So I'm not quite sure how many, I feel like I keep hearing these stories about people who are like, "Yeah, back when I was in college, I paid my way through law school by being I don't know, you hear these crazy stories about people in the 70s that just got jobs without degrees, So I mean that could be part of it. I don't know.
Yeah, no,
these high paying jobs. You're right. How much he spent on journalism and his witty prose style that Perry says he's got. He's got a witty prose style.
Yeah. But anyway, like I said, I came away from this with a more positive view of this Clark Kent than I had before, within the context of really accepting the fact that this is his disguise. Now, I don't subscribe to the Kill Bill theory that Clark is meek and bumbling because that's Superman's indictment of humanity. I wouldn't go that far, but I do agree. The starting point of that whole speech in Kill Bill is that, other superheroes get up and they put on their costume and they become the superhero. Superman is Superman and he becomes Clark Kent. And I think in this context, in this movie, I do, I do think that's the case. When you talk about the split between Clark and Superman, I mean, and this is such a famous scene. I know everyone knows it, but when Clark is waiting for Lois and he has that brief, you know what? I'll argue against myself for a second. You get a little bit of internal tension there where he wants to tell her his secret, right? And he takes off the glasses and he stands up straight and his voice drops. And it's, just from an acting perspective, it's man, you see literally all the little pieces, all the little things that he's doing to look and sound and stand differently. He's a great actor, man. Yeah.
Chris Reeve was a great actor.
Yes, it's such a stretch that people wouldn't know. But if you could ever possibly account for it, I feel like that scene really goes a long way.
I feel like it's a stretch that Lois doesn't know. I feel like everyone else in the Daily Planet or anyone else in the world, I feel like I buy because they're not spending intimate time with Superman up close and personal. But to me, the fact that Lois doesn't know is like kind of crazy. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. But yeah, that scene was, I really I appreciated that. Of course, the irony of him, coming to pick her up as Clark minutes after, during his interview as Superman, he's like, I never lie. It's like, but you lie all the time.
He doesn't lie when he's Superman. Superman.
Yeah, I guess. Although when Lois is like, Clark says you're made up. He's like, Clark? Who's Clark? Yeah, I feel like that's kind of walking the line there a little bit, buddy.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. Where would you like to go next?
What about the Luthor stuff?
Yeah,
Lex Luthor and.
I mean, what's your take on this incarnation of Lex Luthor?
I really like this version of Lex. I like that he's like unashamedly just a bad guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like he refers to himself as a criminal mastermind. The cops are already on his tail for something. Like, you don't know why, but like they see Otis and they're like, oh, they're going to lead us. That's him. He's going to lead us to the big man himself. Who? Lex Luthor? Like, why the cops are after him? You never really get why. You're assuming like maybe he was like had some Ponzi scheme or something. Like my assumption is that he like was like, like one of these guys who like screwed a bunch of people out of money and like then went into hiding. That's kind of where my mind goes to. But like he refers to himself as a criminal mastermind, and he like is just all about just being a bad dude. And like there's no like whatchamacallit, like there's no what is it, like, how the Spider-Man villains in the movies are always like, oh, you can like see how they've got like a heart of gold, but their situation turned them into a bad person. It's like, no, like this, the version of Lex, just like, he's just bad. Like, and like, there's something like nice about the simplicity of that. And which I had never noticed until this rewatch, when he's swimming in the pool and he gets out of the pool and he tells Otis to get his robe. Did you notice that his cap was green? His robe was purple and it had 2 L's on it.
Oh no!
I never noticed that until this rewatch. Yeah, but it's like
cool.
The Lex Luthor colors, and and because he's got the cap on, he's like bald. He's got the cap, so it's like mimicking the bald thing. Like it's a nice little nod that they put in, which I never noticed before.
Yeah. Like this has never been, and I don't think it will ever be, my favorite incarnation of Lex. As much as Gene Hackman's a terrific actor, and I enjoyed what he did with the material, but I would never hold this up as my preferred iteration of the character. But I think for the role that Lex had to serve in this story, it works because we're telling this sweeping story of the journey from Krypton to Earth, the training, the debut. If we were getting into sort of the larger philosophical questions that we've gotten into with other versions of Lex, it's just, I don't know that there was necessarily the real estate, no pun intended, the real estate for something like that. Yeah. I think, and I think my perspective has shifted here too, because I think I used to be a little bit harder on this version of Lex. But you know what? In this movie, I think Lex serves the function that he really needs to, right? Just providing some bit of antagonism for Superman and setting up this, the big climax in the desert with the earthquake. Well,
I mean, also his just personality of like thinking he's better than everyone else, like the way he talks to like Tessmacher and Otis, like when the first time you see Lex, his first line is they're looking at a video footage of Otis, and he's like, "It's amazing that brain can generate enough power to move one leg in front of the other." He has so many like zingers like that are like really good.
I mean, my God, his reaction when he sees Otisburg on the map is great.
Dude, there's one scene, again, I never noticed before until this watch, when Superman's confronting Lex, and I think it's when they're in the library part, right? And they're about to go to the Otisburg, like the map. It's before they get to the map. They're in the library part, and Superman's like standing like with his hands like kind of like crossed in front of him, and him and Lex are like staring right at each other. And Lex screams, he goes, "Miss Tessmacher!" and screams, and he's standing right in front of Superman when he does it. And Christopher Reeve's reaction is like, he goes like, Like he like jumps back and his hands open up and he's like, and this would be like, what the hell? Like the whole like with the screaming, and I never noticed that, but like it's just really funny. Like he scares the shit out of Superman. He's like what? It's a really good moment.
That is cool. It's, you know, one of the things that I noticed on this rewatch is that they only have one scene together. I mean, two, when he brings Lex to the, you know, to the prison at the very end, but they don't really have much interaction there. But it's like they have one big scene. I mean, it's not a small scene, but they have one big scene together. And I think in terms of what was written and what they portrayed, I think it worked well. Yeah. Again, here you don't have sort of the more philosophical objections to Superman from Lex that you get elsewhere. This is pretty surface level. Basically, he's got this real estate scheme and Superman's in his way, and that's about as much depth as we get. But like I said, I think it works fine for what it is.
Yeah. And he brings like humor to it without undercutting the sinisterness of the character. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like the humor's all like his wit and being surrounded by like an idiot like Otis, you know? Like,
yeah, you know what? I feel like in the past I always kind of characterized this Lex as being on the campier side, but I don't think that's an accurate description. I don't know that I would say campy. It's humorous, but it is that dark humor, and you know, Hackman really sells that. So yeah, no, I like this Lex. I don't love this Lex.
Yeah, like when they're when they're in the car in the ambulance car, and Otis like was supposed to put the coordinates on the missile, and he put the wrong coordinates in, and because he was supposed to put a 7 and 11, but he put a 117, 11 and 7, but he put a 117, and he's like, oh, it's I don't really have a long arm. And Lex like, long arm? You want to see a long arm? And then, like he starts like fighting him, and the next time you see them, Otis has a black eye. It's good. It's good little humor jokes like that.
Yeah. No, there's stuff that's genuinely funny. Little things when after Superman's made his debut and Perry's tasking the Daily Planet staffers with finding out more about him, and he goes up to Clark. He's like, "Who's his favorite ball club?" And like Clark's about to answer.
Clark goes to answer. Yeah.
I know we skipped over it, but I know you said you were not a fan of the Lois's poem as they're flying together.
Oh yeah. That's ridiculous. That I have no idea how that even got in the movie.
That was like I said, we've not, we've only tangentially mentioned the music, but that's a scene where I think the music and the visuals could have carried it. And I think it would have worked. It would have worked just fine. Yeah. As much as I love the balcony scene between the two, the balcony scene is so well written because there's this exchange of information about Superman, but again, you're also on this other level getting the flirtation and the development of that relationship. So I think it works so well. And it's funny too, when you see Superman's strategy in the scene, because like any time where Lois is encroaching on personal information, he like very quickly pivots. Like when she says, "Do you have a first name?" And he's like, "What do you mean, Ralph or something?" And before she can ask a follow-up, like she moves away from the planter and he can now see through her dress, and he, that whole moment, again, little things like that I thought were clever. But yeah, the flying, do you like that sequence in and of itself? Absent the poem?
I mean, I think it's a little long. I think the poem like makes it I think it's a little too long. And like, and when like, they're like, he's got her like flat out, and he's holding her by one hand, and they're both kind of like in that flying position. I turned to Laura, I'm like, do you know how fast they'd have to be flying to maintain enough lift for her to be like up, like flat like that? Like I feel like her skin would be like off her body. You know what I mean? They'd have to be going at like Mach 3 to maintain that like flight like that. But
I know I'm no physicist, but I had the same thought. Like, I don't know that really works. We talked about how, we watched the special edition, right? Which is, I think, 151 minutes. There is also the 3-hour extended cut. You've never watched that, right?
Never have, no.
So just as a quick side note, this was the television version that not Donner, but the Salkins, the producers, created essentially to pad the television runtime to create more space for commercials. And for years and years, this was sort of something that fans only had on, if they had recorded it off of the television on VHS. A few years ago, Warner Brothers put it out on DVD and Blu-ray, and I have watched it once, and I just wanted to address it for a second for anyone who is curious about it. It's one of those things. If what?
Well, I was gonna say, what do they add? Is it new footage?
Yeah,
there's okay.
Yeah, so it's a half hour of additional footage, but for the most part, it's a good example of the importance of editing. So, for example, when Otis is walking through Grand Central and walking through the streets of Metropolis, in the TV cut, like, it just goes on and on of him walking. Like the scenes of the Kents driving away, I think after they find Clark in the field or something, like that goes on. It's just very padded. I mean, there's some substance. I can't really recall a ton of things off the top of my head, but for the most part, it's all stuff that was cut for a reason. There's one really cool moment though, where in the climax where Superman saves Jimmy by the dam, and he holds Jimmy up and gives Jimmy a moment to get a shot of it with his camera. And so Superman's like, Jimmy, like, get your shot. So like, that was a cool little moment between them. Like, that would have been cool to leave in there, I thought. But for the most part, it was all stuff that you kind of looked at and you're like, I get why they cut this. But I would just say, if anyone, if you love Superman the movie, it's not, it's worth watching at least once. You get some more footage that maybe you've never seen before with these characters, and it kills the pacing. Like, it just totally kills the pacing. But it makes it something different. It just becomes something that you sort of just kind of like settle in and let it wash over you. It's not going to be a tight, punchy, 4-act thing. It's going to be, a bit more meandering. But if you go in knowing that, again, I think it's worth a watch for once. Would I say this will be your definitive version to watch? No, very unlikely.
So when it was airing on TV, was it like a 5-hour like event? Because if they put commercials in,
they did it over 2 nights.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
So,
gotcha.
Shall we move to the climax here to California?
Yeah. Let's do it.
California desert. These 2 missiles. What would you like to discuss about this?
Well, my question, I guess, rewatching it now is, what was the point of launching those missiles? Were they testing the missiles? Was that what was going on?
The government was, yeah.
Yeah. Because I was wondering like why they were launched to begin with, because I wasn't sure if they made that super clear rewatching it. Was it just supposed to be a test, but then Lex like re-entered the targets, and that's what happened?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, this is a cool scene, man. Like when Superman does like all his heroics, when he like saves the one that always sticks into my mind is the train, when he like lays down on the track and the train goes over him. That's like an iconic like moment in my head.
Yeah. What was cool about that whole sequence was, all these superhero movies that we have now, there's always the big bad, and it's always the fate of the universe at stake. And that's fine, but I really did prefer the smaller stakes of this. I mean, look, losing the West Coast is not necessarily low stakes, but compared to what we get in these movies these days, and also the fact that I think I thought they struck a nice balance between giving us some spectacle of him, engaging in all of these super saves, but doing it in a way that was realistic for their budget and technological capability, right? So he's not fighting Doomsday, but he's, engaging in all these saves and using his powers in cool ways.
I mean, he doesn't really fight anybody in this movie, if you think about it, which is like, for me, I'm a big action guy, so like I love the fight scenes and stuff, but like thinking back to Superman 2, those fights are kind of suck in Superman 2. Like, I mean, not to put it bluntly. So like, I think the fact there is no fight in this movie, for the budget and the effects that they had and the fight choreography training they had, I think kind of makes us better that there's not a fight, because they just didn't like. I feel like the fights in Superman 2 are a big part of what make that movie feel like corny and dated, because it feels like they didn't have great like fight choreography, that nobody knew martial arts. There was no like nothing that felt like epic in it. So like the fact that's not in this movie, I think, is part of why it feels like still like it holds up so much, because like what the super stuff he does looks really good still, you know?
Yeah. No, for sure. And like I said, watching the bonus features and seeing how they created the miniature town that, is in danger of being flooded, which is really cool to see. So yeah, the saves were great. And of course we build up to Lois's death. I definitely remember as a kid. I don't want to say I was scarred by it, but her death by the cave-in, but the suffocation. Mm-hmm. I remember being kind of affected by that as a kid. That was pretty intense.
It's intense. It's super intense. Yeah, I remember like seeing like the dirt like going on. Like, yeah, that's definitely something that like scarred me when I was a kid. Like, that's like crazy. And the thing that also really burned into my brain for that whole sequence is Superman's scream when he's like, yeah, like he does that like and it echoes, and it's like a crazy like insane scream that he does. That's like you can like really feel like that. That's like burned into my head from a young age.
Yeah. The moment that sticks with me from the Christopher Reeve performance is immediately before that, when he's just doing the no. Like that really sticks with me. And then after he's reversed time and he finds Lois and she's alive and the car won't start, and he's like, don't bother, I think it's dead. And there's just this relief in his voice and on his face that's so palpable. Mm-hmm. And then when she sort of yells at him and then walks by him and he just breathes that sigh of relief. Like I said, the movie really does humanize him. The performance, especially, really, really brings it home. But this whole bit about reversing time, and this was originally going to be the end of the second Superman movie, and then they decided to just focus on finishing the first one, and they took that ending and they used it here. I've never read, and I've not heard. I don't know if you have. Like, what was the original ending for this? Did they have one?
I have no idea. I mean, they probably didn't, because that's why they used it, right? Like the reversing time I kind of have an issue with, because it's like he reverses time, but it's as if none of the events happened then.
Yes.
Right? Like so there's kind of a logic leap here. One of these, like, you're not supposed to ask those questions kind of thing that I was talking about before. But yeah, him turning back time, you don't see him like stop the missiles then. So like what happens, like
that's the thing. That's where it always lost me too. I can buy that he's rewinding. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But once he presses play,
yeah,
events would still unfold.
Unless See, this is where, if you break this down, think about it too hard, it doesn't make sense, right? Because if he's reversing time and time goes back, he's outside the planet moving around. So when he starts moving time backwards, is there another version of him that's going back through time while he's spinning the planet around? Or is, because he's spinning the planet around, time's reversing without him in it, so then therefore when he presses play, he can then fly right. So when he presses play, he's no longer in the pool with the kryptonite chains. He's in the sky, and then he can like take out both missiles before they launch. That's like the only thing I can think of. Because if he's in space reversing time and time's reversing while he's doing that, does that mean there's another version of him, or is there no version of him being reversed in time? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, I had never thought about it like that. That makes it worse. It's like,
yeah, I know. It's a very haphazard ending. It's not a lot of thought went into it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess going with my whole thing about about rewinding, all I would have needed is he rewinds and then maybe he's back at the dam, but this time he like moves faster to get to Lois,
yeah.
Sort of thing. Or now he knows exactly where she is, so he can get there faster. Like I just needed, I needed something.
But like when he reverses time, like nothing happened. Like the rockets don't.
Right.
There's no damage done to any of the coast. So like he would have then had to have taken them out before they launched, because the Hackensack one obviously doesn't go off either.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're meant to assume he's doing this and they just didn't show it to us. I really don't. I don't know. I know we're overthinking it. I know that they didn't.
We're definitely overthinking it. Yeah.
I know they didn't put as much thought into this as we are, but it always bugged me. But as far as, okay, this is the last, I guess, big question and big, like, what do you think it means piece? But Jor-El's whole thing about it is forbidden to interfere with human history. I mean, I guess there are, like, I don't know, a couple of questions.
I mean, isn't him just existing, like, interfering with human history? Like,
that's always been my thing, but I guess, again, this is a different, like, okay, this is the different world. This is the 1978 Richard Donner world where people are not really fazed by the presence of an alien with these powers. So maybe his very presence, literally saving a cat from a tree and stopping some of these burglaries, maybe that's not enough to interfere with human history. Maybe Jor-El was really meaning that more literally. I mean, I guess certainly reversing time seems like that would fall into the category of what's forbidden. And I guess this is not the Donner movie, right? But Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, disarming the world of nuclear weapons, that I guess would fall into the category, making such a wide scale change.
Or does he literally mean it literally in human history, meaning don't go into the past and screw around with what already happened?
Yeah, I feel like in the earlier bit during the training, I think, or in the rocket, that because he says it a couple of times in the movie, and I think at one of the points he says, let your example inspire them or something like that. So I think it's taking too active a role. Either way, I guess no matter how you look at it, what Superman does here clearly flies in the face of of Jor-El's rule, but there are no consequences.
Yeah, I was going to say there's nothing happens negatively with him. Or is that supposed to be, I actually took this, I'm so glad you brought this up because this jogged my memory when I was watching it. When he flies up into the sky, he hears Jor-El say it's forbidden for you to interfere with human history. But then right after that, he hears Pa Kent say, you are here for a reason. And that's when he decides to turn the planet back. And maybe this is actually the resolution to the you're here for a reason part, not that's like him deciding, am I a Kryptonian or am I human?
Yeah.
Choosing my human path. Maybe that's it. Maybe I'm reading too much into it too. Maybe.
No, maybe that's the tension and the need to reconcile the two that I've been longing for. Maybe that is there. I did clock that as well, especially in this rewatch, that he hears the both of them, and he ultimately makes the move after hearing Pa Kent. So I don't know. I guess this idea of using his power in this way, right? Previously, there was someone close to him who died. He either didn't have enough power at that time or didn't know how to use the power. He couldn't save Pa Kent, but now he has mastery over his powers. He can do this, and he's making that choice despite and the whole movie, Jor-El's telling him, you are not one of them. Right? You are not, you will live among them, but you are not one of them. And, maybe this is him, choosing another path, which then will also, again, thinking about the fact that they were filming these movies together, knowing that the central tension in the second movie is his desire to live as a human with Lois, I guess this kind of leads to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so hard for me to think about this movie with 2 in mind because, like I said, when we talked about 2, I've only ever seen 2, twice or 3 times, including the time I watched for the show. So but yeah, I mean that probably, was probably definitely the forbidden human history was probably going to be paid off in the second one in a bigger way.
Maybe. It also gave us the classic GIF of, Superman looking from side to side when he's up in the clouds and he hears the voice. Yeah. That's great. You see that all the time online. That's a fun one.
Yeah, and the gentleman, is that man all right with the power line workers? That there's that. Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of the movie. I know, like I said, we didn't talk about the music much. I don't necessarily have much to say other than
it's great.
It's iconic. It brings the movie to life, truly, in such a powerful way. I mean, I've been doing some prep for these upcoming episodes, especially the ones coming up where I'm reading comics that were either written by or inspired by Donner. That'll be our next episode. And I've been listening to the soundtrack as I'm reading it. And it just, it tells the story in its own way. And it's so ingrained. I think when we think of the Krypton sequence, the Smallville sequence and so on, it's right there.
I mean, it's like the iconic superhero theme. I mean, I don't even just mean Superman. I mean like superheroes in general. Like it's like the iconic theme. And I think like this and like the Batman theme are like the two that are like the Danny Elfman Batman theme are they're so iconic and you're never going to top them in terms of like recognizable superhero themes, which is why I think modern movies like Man of Steel, right? The themes in those, like I've noticed that like the modern movies, like in The Dark Knight and Man of Steel and in the new The Batman, which you haven't seen yet, but it's really, really good. The music in that as well. But like the music in the modern movies feels more like situational music to elevate what you're seeing on the screen at that moment. Whereas like this Superman theme is more like you just hear it and you think Superman. It's like the title credit, like music that just like hits you in the face and like just like instantly makes you think of the character. And they don't really make themes like that anymore for these movies. Like the Marvel movies don't have like what's Captain America's theme music? Can you like hum it? Like I have no idea. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that this theme is so iconic for that reason that like everyone can just hum it and know it and like instantly like everyone knows this music, you know?
Yeah, totally. No, that's a great point. I think you have seen that shift. Yeah, that's the thing. I like this soundtrack really, you can listen to it on its own and it tells a story. I mean, I didn't watch this, but there's a version on the Blu-ray that's a soundtrack or score only version of the movie. Like they take out all the dialogue and you can just watch the movie and listen to the music.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I don't know how many other superhero movies you could do that for. You know? Yeah.
I mean, The Rocketeer has pretty good music. I mean, that's one that I think is right up there. You've never seen Rocketeer, have you?
No.
Oh, dude, that's one we should watch for and do a podcast on.
All right.
In your like list, because that's a really good one, man.
I'm game.
Yeah, man, this music it's iconic, and I think that it's smart that in modern movies they don't try to like make a new, you know what I mean? Like no one's trying to like replace this music, you know, because like, you can't. It's like it's unbeatable.
Yeah. So we are fast approaching 2.5 hours, which is not so unusual for this show, but at the same time, we'll wind it down. But listen, is there anything else? I know how much this movie has meant to you. Is there anything else that we have not talked about or anything else you wanted to say about this iteration of the character, this movie that we didn't get to yet?
Oh man, I'm probably forgetting a bunch of stuff because there's so many things I want to talk about going into this, but like, again, favorite superhero movie, my top 5 favorite movies of all time. This is just a really, really solid take on the character and Christopher Reeve. Again, my favorite Superman. I'm not, and in real life, the guy was like a superhero, you know, like after what happened to him, and he just inspires so many people, like in his own life. So it's there's so much about him and this movie and this portrayal that like is so important to so many people, myself included. So yeah, man, I think there's a reason why this movie's like everyone like references it and like, you know, it means so much to so many people. I don't know. It's getting late and I'm tired. So like I'm losing my train of thought here, but like, yeah, I love it, man. It's great.
It was so great to be able to finally have this full on conversation with you, as much as we did Superman 2 and Superman, the movie, has come up, in a lot of episodes, but to really do a dedicated episode to it. And there was a reason why I waited 50 episodes in, because I knew it was worthy of this larger exploration. And, I knew it was something fun to build to, and I know how much it's meant to people. And it's, again, to be clear, it's meant a lot to me, not to the level of you and a lot of other fans, but I've always had a lot of love for it. And even more so now with my sort of new take on it, but also just appreciating how well made a movie it is. I think that was, if I had to like really boil it down to one thing for this rewatch, I think that was the piece of it from a narrative standpoint, but also the technical standpoint. I was just so impressed by what they were able to accomplish. And yeah, man, I mean, this set the standard and the template for so long. To this day, people still long for this version of the character. And for those people, go back to this movie, watch the 3-hour extended cut, watch the 3-hour cut, go nuts.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And I know I want to end on, I don't know if this is the wrong point to end on, but like, because this is so great, I hope that future filmmakers who try to tackle Superman, like, take the inspiration from this movie in the sense of like, I want to make a cool, unique version of the character that stays true to who he is, but put my stamp on it. But because that's exactly what Richard Donner did. He wasn't imitating anyone else. He made his own unique version of this world, staying very true to like the tenets of who the character was at the time. But like, this movie exists with a visual flair and style that is unique to like Donner's vision. It's not like, it wasn't trying to be the George Reeves show. You know, this is so different from the George Reeves show, you know? So, it's a great movie, man. Such a great movie.
Well, thank you, Ken, so much for this. And thank you to the audience. I hope you were able to stick with us for these 2.5 hours, however many sittings it took you to get through it. And I know, as much as we talked about, I know there's still more, you know, aspects to this that we didn't, but this movie has been covered so many times by so many people. I'm proud of the fact that for this, you know, we talked about our respective relationships to the movie and what we've gotten out of it, because I think that's the personal side of it. And, you know, wherever our audience falls for their own, you know, experience with this movie, that's, you know, for them to say. But I'm glad that was sort of how we approach this. I enjoyed this so much. So thank you. Everyone, make sure that you follow Ken on social media. Make sure you come back next week for part 2 of our big Donnerverse event. Ken and I are going to be doing a discussion of The Batman. It's going to be part of my new spin-off podcast, Digging for Justice, a DC movie fan journey. That's going to be a Patreon exclusive monthly series. And it's going to kick off in April with Ken. We'll be talking about The Batman. So make sure you tune in for that. Again, we'll be back here in 1 week with part 2 of the Donnerverse. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. One action I hope you will take is to consider joining my Patreon community. My new spin-off podcast, Digging for Justice, a DC movie fan journey, is coming soon exclusively on my Patreon, starting at the $1 level. Many more rewards are available too, including a robust catalog of bonus podcasts. Thank you to all patrons for enabling me to produce this show.